39. It looked like the sort of night that one would plan on meeting a vampire. Everything was damp mist and white snow and wan light from a moon lost somewhere in the silver fog. Luckier people were probably telling stories before warm fires, or tucked away in blanketed beds, not freezing as they crossed a rickety bridge and reached an isolated cemetery where dogs howled like wolves and a vampire lord hid his underground court. Evangeline shivered and Jax watched her, but he offered absolutely no comfort as a gust of wind tore through the fog and posters with her likeness flapped against gnarled gates and trees. Missing. Princess Evangeline, help us find her. Evangeline wanted to ask how the signs had been made and put up so quickly, but now that she and Jax were on the outskirts of the city where it felt safer to finally speak, she wanted to use her questions wisely. Tell me about the vampires, Jack's mouth twisted distastefully. Don't let them bite you. I already know that. What else can you share? Maybe something helpful? There's nothing helpful about vampires, Jax grunted. I know the stories make them sound brooding and beautiful. They're parasitic bloodsuckers. Evangeline side-eyed Jax, wishing the night weren't as dark or that he weren't walking so far from her that she could have a clearer view of his face. Earlier she'd sensed he wasn't overly fond of vampires, but he'd not been this annoyed. And he'd defended chaos to Lala. Are you jealous? Evangeline asked. Why would I be jealous? Because I'm so curious. Jax answered with an acerbic laugh. Evangeline felt her cheeks go hot, but she wasn't sure if she believed in his dismissal. Jax was used to being the most interesting whenever he went. He was the most powerful, the most unpredictable, and until now he'd always made Evangeline the most curious. If you're not jealous, then what do you have against them? This was your idea, and it's not as if you don't have a thing for blood. I also like the sun and being in control of my own life, but vampires will always be ruled by their hunger for blood. Their every desire is dominated by bloodlust, so try not to cut yourself while we're inside and don't look in their eyes. What will happen if I look in their eyes? Just don't do it. Why not? Does the mighty Prince of Hearts know so little about vampires that all he can do is warn me not to Jack's move before she could finish? He suddenly stood so close that for a pounding heartbeat she could only see his cruel face. His brilliant eyes shone in the dark, and his predatory smile could have belonged to a vampire had his teeth been just a little sharper. There's a reason no one ever talks about them. His voice became low and lethal. I can tell you that they're soulless monsters. I can warn you that if you look into a vampire's eyes, they'll take it as an invitation to rip into your throat faster than you can scream the word no, but none of this will scare you away. The stories are cursed, but instead of warping the truth, they manipulate the way people feel. No matter what I tell you about vampires, you're going to be intrigued instead of horrified. Your kind always wants to be bitten or changed. Not me, Evangeline argued. But you're curious, Jax challenged. I'm curious about a lot of things. I'm curious about you, but I don't want you to bite me. The corner of Jack's mouth twitched. I've already done that, little fox. His cold fingers found her wrist and slipped underneath the edge of her glove to stroke the last remaining broken heart scar. Lucky for you, no matter how many times I bite you, you'll never turn into what I am. But sometimes all it takes from a vampire is one look, and you're theirs. Jax eyed the bare stretch of skin that went from her chest to her neck, and before she could read the look on his face, he dropped her wrist and stalked off into a dark kingdom of crits and tombstones. They walked in near silence until Jax found a broad mausoleum, covered in vines of demon's bittercress, and guarded by two sad stone angels. One angel mourned over a pair of broken wings, while the other played a harp with broken strings. Jax idly plucked at one of the damaged strings. After strumming several soundless notes, the doors to the mausoleum slid open. There normally might have been a gate to separate visitors from the coffins, but instead there was another door, old and wooden with a touch of iron scrollwork. It resembled a number of the doors she'd seen at Wolf Hall except for the glowing keyhole. Honey-thick light poured through the little curving shape, gleaming brighter the closer they drew to the door, flickering and promising and far more inviting than the door to Jax's church had been. That door didn't want to be opened, but this one did. Come in from out of the cold, it whispered. I'll keep you warm. Jax speared her with a quicksilver glare. Don't be dazzled. You're useless to me as a vampire. Well, let's hope I don't decide I'd rather be a vampire than be useful to you. Jack's eyes turned into daggers. Evangeline fought the urge to flash him a gloating smile, but a corner of it snuck out. She knew she couldn't become too comfortable with taunting Jax, but just because she liked a door didn't mean she was going to step through and bare her throat for a vampire. She was also feeling emboldened by the knowledge that she was not as replaceable as he tried to make her believe. He needed her for his precious Valerie Arch, which wasn't entirely reassuring, but she'd worry about that later after she found Apollo's real killer and cleared her name of suspicion. Instead of telling me what I shouldn't do, you should make more of an effort to do things that make me want to continue working with you, such as saving your life. You do that for yourself, but I still did it. If it weren't for me, your story would be over. Jax ended the conversation by hitting his knuckles against the door and saying, We're here to see chaos. "The master is not accepting visitors tonight," said a voice like heavy rain, musical and enthralling. Jax rolled his eyes. "Tell your master that the Prince of Hearts is here, and he owes me an unforgiven debt." The door opened immediately. Jax clenched his jaw almost as if he wished his words hadn't worked. It would have been easy for Evangeline to anger Jax further by making a show of being bewitched. The vampire who opened the door was exactly what she'd expected. He looked like the son of a warrior demigod, or someone who had just really excellent bone structure, dressed like an elegant assassin, in a fitted black leather tunic and high-collared coat that had thick cuffs folded up to his muscled forearms, revealed skin so flawless it glowed. She remembered not to look in the vampire's eyes, but she could feel heat pouring off him. His gaze hungrily raked over her form-fitting corset with a smile that was all sharp fangs. Her heart raced. His fangs grew longer. "Relax," Jack's voice in Evangeline's head. "Fear only excites them, little fox." Her blood continued to rush. "You still can't control me," she thought back, "and you told me you wouldn't try." "I was only trying to warn you," Jack silently replied. And then, as if he weren't a monster as well, Jack slid an arm underneath her cape and wrapped it around Evangeline's waist, holding her possessively tight as he drawled, "Stop flashing your fangs. I'm the only one who gets to bite her." Jack snipped at Evangeline's ear, cold and sharp. She felt the sting of it everywhere, covering her with gooseflesh, which somehow turned to blush when it reached her cheeks. "No matter how many times I bite you, you'll never turn into what I am," he'd said. And now he was doing it just to prove that he could. Evangeline started to pull away. "Don't!" Jack spread his fingers and tightened his grip on her waist. "Humans don't have power here. If he thinks I can't control you, he'll do it, and I guarantee you'll enjoy that even less." "You still didn't have to bite me," Evangeline thought, and she would have shaken him off, but she wasn't there to fight with Jax. She was there because Apollo was dead and she needed to find out who killed him. So instead of battling Jax, she gritted her teeth as he released her waist and took hold of her hand. Without another word, their vampire guide led them forward. At first, the wide hallways and the dramatic stone staircases were not so different from the oldest parts of Wolf Hall. The walls were covered with works of art, ancient shields, and steel blades that took on a bronze tint beneath the heavy rings of candle-covered chandeliers. The stairs took them deeper and deeper underground, where the air once again turned to frost, and eventually found herself fighting on the urge to lean into Jax. So far, there were no coffins or corpses, but she had heard several rattling noises that sounded like chains. A few steps later, she might have caught the coppery scent of blood. And were those shackles hanging between a pair of portraits? After another flight of stairs, their guide directed them into an indoor courtyard full of limestone columns and night-blooming flowers, where it was impossible to miss all the shackles. They gleamed against the walls and columns, polished and ready to use. Mononcles for wrists and ankles and necks were proudly displayed above game tables set with black and white chessboards. The seats were all empty, but Evangeline and horrible flashes of vampires lounging in leather chairs and playing with pawns and rooks while their bleeding human captives writhed against their restraints. Her discomfort increased as she and Jax were led from the indoor courtyard to a banquet room. It was also similar to the ones in Wolf Hall, with rich wine-red rugs and an enormous table. But here there were human-sized cages dangling in between the chandeliers. Instead of silver plates and cloth napkins, the tables were set with more chains and shackles that attached to the wood. Evangeline felt sick. Thankfully, all the constraints were unoccupied, but the emptiness of everything unsettled her as well. Where was everyone, and where exactly was their guide taking them? "Still curious about vampires?" Jax murmured. "Why is this place so vacant?" Evangeline said under her breath. "Where?" She froze as their guide disappeared. He moved quicker than an arrow being shot from a bow. One moment, he was a few feet in front of them, and then he was gone. He darted through a door at the end of the room with preternatural speed, leaving them alone. Where did he just go? "This is why I hate vampires." Jax worked his jaw as his eyes darted from the door to their guide had just gone through, to the cages hanging above. "I think we might need to get out of here." "I'm disappointed, my friend," said a voice like smoke and velvet. Gritty and slightly hypnotic. "You're the one who taught me how useful cages can be." Evangeline didn't even see this vampire enter. He was just there, slowly walking toward them. He wore no coat or cloak, just sinuous leather armor, and a vicious bronze helm that concealed his face, save for his eyes and the slash of his cheekbones. "It's you," Evangeline breathed. "You're the soldier from the party in the spires." "Not actually a soldier, princess." His voice was softer when he spoke to her, pure velvet without the smoke. "I'm Chaos. Welcome to my home." 40. Chaos was suddenly before her, taking her gloved hand in his, and bringing it to where his lips would have been had he not worn the bronze helm. Jax might have tried to tuck her away, but she was only half paying attention to him. She'd made the mistake of looking into Chaos's eyes, although as soon as she had done it, it didn't feel like a mistake. How could eyes be so magnificent be a mistake? They were bottle green and brilliant, with slivers of gold that made it look as if they'd been shot through with broken pieces of stars, or if he was a star fallen to the earth, and if she made a wish, he would grant it with one. "Evangeline," Jax growled. His cold fingers gripped her cheek and wrenched her back until her eyes met his. She wanted to return to the other beautiful bottle-green eyes, but Jack's harsh gaze worked like an antidote to the vampire's wonder, reminding her that looking into Chaos's eyes would not lead to wishes come true, but to shackles and cages and sharp teeth and tearing into her skin. "Don't do that again, little fox." He dropped his hand from her face. Evangeline felt her cheeks go red. It was just what he'd warned her about. Sometimes all it takes from them is one look and you're theirs. The first one had been so attractive in an unexpected way, but it was as if something extra poured off Chaos, something that hadn't been there the other times they'd met. Even now she could feel it tempting her to take another look, to forget the way that Lala had called him a monster. Chaos laughed loud and easy. "You should have prepared her better, my friend. She seems particularly sensitive to allure. Or maybe she just likes me more than she likes you." "She hates me," Jack said pleasantly. "So even if she likes you more, that's not saying very much." "Are you certain about that?" Chaos slid another gaze Evangeline's way. Fresh heat prickled her skin. There were different types of vampire gazes. Evangeline was not yet familiar with them all. She couldn't completely tell the difference between a hungry gaze and a seductive gaze, or the gaze of one right before he gives chase. The gazes she'd felt so far just felt like heat, as if parts of her were too close to fire. She could feel that burn coming off Chaos now, as he offered her his arm. "Don't worry, Princess. The only people who are put in those cages are the ones who wish to be there." Evangeline steeled away to her options. Earlier, it would have been appealing to take Chaos's arm just to irritate Jax. Now the choice wasn't as inviting, but considering that they were going to acquire information from him, she wasn't sure it was wise to dismiss his offer either. In fact, it probably wouldn't have been wise to reject it even if they didn't want something from Chaos. Evangeline accepted his arm. Despite the layer of leather, he felt much warmer than Jack's. "Don't get too cozy, little fox." Jax's expression was a mask of disinterest, but the voice in her head was distinctly irritated. "There's a reason why he wears the helm." "Why is that?" Evangeline asked, but Jax didn't answer her question. After a moment, she cast a quick look up toward Chaos's cruel helm. She caught a glimpse of flawless olive skin, but she didn't dare look past his cheekbones, and even they were obscured by spikes jutting out of his headpiece. It couldn't have been comfortable. The entire lower half of Chaos's face was completely covered, including his mouth, which, now that she thought about it, was peculiar for being supposedly controlled by its lust for blood. He turned his gaze scorching her as he caught her staring. Quickly she tore her attention away. "You don't have to avoid my eyes." His velvet voice moved to her ear, the warm metal of his helm intentionally brushing her temple. "The helm you are staring at is cursed, and it prevents me from biting anyone. You're perfectly safe from me, isn't that right, Jax?" "He's been trapped in that thing for centuries," Jax confirmed. "But you will never be safe with him." They traveled through another series of hostile halls before Chaos fully released Evangeline's arm to an open, heavy iron door with a mere tug of gloved fingers. At a glance, the room they entered could have belonged to a scholar. There were bins of papyrus scrolls and shelves and tables laden with leather-bound books, pens, parchments, all drenched in warm candlelight bright enough to be read by. Even the air smelled of paper mixed with redolent hints of mahogany. It wasn't until Evangeline went to take a seat in one of the chairs that she noticed all the thick shackles on the arms and legs, some of which had nasty barbs that would pierce a person's skin when the monocle was put on. She went for another seat, but all the chairs contained the same ominous restraints. "Really?" Jax took one of the shackles and twirled it in his fingers as if it were a cheap piece of jewelry. "These are getting to be a bit much. You might want to reconsider how you entertain your guests if you have to chain them all up." "I'm surprised you're so judgmental," said Chaos. "I heard about what you did with that princess. What was her name? Diana?" "I have no idea who you're talking about," Jack said smoothly, although Evangeline noticed him tense just as he had when Lala had said that Jax had been obsessed with Princess Donatella. Unfortunately, Evangeline didn't get further answers. Chaos didn't say more on the subject as he crossed over to a pair of burgundy curtains and parted the drapes halfway, not quite enough for Evangeline to see what they'd been concealing, although she heard a chatter from the other side. It sounded like a number of people all trying to talk too loudly as their voices echoed upward. Giving into her curiosity, Evangeline moved closer to the party curtains. It seemed they were actually on a balcony overlooking a small amphitheater. The railing on the other side of the drapes was all marble stone, as the floor below, with a gathering of vampires and humans, stood on a massive black and white checkered board. She hoped they were playing kissing chess. She couldn't bring herself to imagine other more likely reasons as to why all the vampires were dressed in blood red. The humans were clad in white, standing on opposite sides of the board. Many of the humans might have appeared attractive or strong under other circumstances, but in comparison to the row, they looked tired and worn. Their shoulders weren't as straight, and their hair was duller. Various shades of skin did not gleam like polished stone. "I hope you all know Chaos called down. I've come to think of many of you as my family, and I hope your fate turns out better than theirs did. Good luck. The amphitheater erupted in movement. What are they doing? Evangeline's hands clutched the marble rail as she watched the vampires cross the checkered floor in pillars of speed. Blood red collided with white as each vampire found a human, and Evangeline could already tell none of them were going to be kissing. Isn't this practice rather archaic? Jax asked. He dropped the chair fetter to join them at the balcony rail, but he appeared far from entertained by the scene below. If Evangeline hadn't known better, she might have thought Jax was concerned. He gripped the railing almost as tightly as she did, while the vampires bathed their fangs and bit into the necks of every human on the floor. 41. Gasps and wails and a few harsh grunts consumed the amphitheater. Stop them, Evangeline cried. None of them would be pleased if I did that, Chaos said. All of the humans have been waiting for this night. Why would anyone want this? Evangeline watched helplessly as chains rattled and a number of human-sized cages were lowered to the checked ground. A girl about her age with long spirals of red and copper hair fought against the vampire who bit her as he shoved her in one of the cages and closed it with a heavy lock. Everything was clattering metal and painted pleas as some people were dragged out of the amphitheater. Other humans filled the rest of the cages, which were then raised back toward the ceiling, and any lingering romantic notions of vampires that Evangeline had completely disappeared. Let them out, she demanded. She might have done something terribly reckless then, like grab for anything with weapon potential and toss it toward the cages, but Jack's hand slid across the rail and twined his cold fingers with hers. He didn't hold her back, he just held her hand, stunning her into silence. You don't want any of them out of their cages, Chaos said. He sounded faintly amused, but it was difficult to be sure when his bronze helm concealed most of his expression. This is the final phase of our initiation process to join the Order of the Spies and Assassins. There are 2 different types of bites. We can bite a human merely to feed from them, or we can infect our bites with venom to turn a human into. Every human on that floor received a bite infected with venom. So they're all turning into now? Evangeline hazarded a look toward the cages. The captives were rattling the bars and ripping at the locks, looking close to feral. Yet they also appeared more attractive than before. Their skin glowed, their movements were knife-quick and even matted with blood, their hair shone like curtains of silk. The venom has fixed their human imperfections, but they won't become unless they drink human blood before dawn, Chaos said. At sunrise, the venom will dissipate. Until that happens, the changelings will fight with all their power to get out of their prisons and feed. The ones that succeed in breaking free of their cages and drinking human blood will become full-fledged and members of our order. What happens to the others? Evangeline asked. You should be more concerned that you 2 are the closest things to humans here. So you might want to make the rest of this meeting quick. The urge to take that first bite is overwhelming. We call it hunger, but it's really pain. Chaos paused long enough for Evangeline to hear nothing save for the rattle of cages. Then she felt the surge of heart at her neck and chest, letting her know that Chaos's gaze was on her, hot and hungry, and Jack's clear as though Chaos averted his eyes. Evangeline breathed, but not too deeply. The changelings might not be at full strength, Chaos continued smoothly, but the intense desire to feed and survive can sometimes make up for it. 1 or 2 of them always manages to escape. A spark of crimson flashed in Evangeline's peripheral vision. The girl with the red and copper curls was in a cage not too far from the balcony, only now her hair looked like pure flames, and she appeared far from helpless as her fingers curled around the bars and her tongue darted out to lick her lips. Evangeline found herself squeezing Jack's hand harder, feeling thankful he'd not let her go. Chaos tilted his head, eyes landing on their entwined hands. Interesting. This is getting tedious. Jax dropped Evangeline's hand and sauntered back to the scholarly suite, where the rasp of changelings and the rattle of cages weren't all consuming. Chaos and Evangeline followed, took a seat in a large leather chair, the only one without shackles. He motioned toward the other seats, but Evangeline chose to stand, knowing how quickly they could move. She didn't want to sit in a chair where her wrists and ankles could be so easily imprisoned. We want to know who killed Apollo, Jack said. Chaos looked up at Evangeline. I heard you did it while in bed on your... It wasn't me, she interrupted. That's disappointing. I was going to offer you a job. I'm not a killer, Evangeline said. Someone else poisoned my husband. We wanted to know if any of your people were hired for the job, Jax added. Chaos leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers with the show of ease of someone who didn't have to worry about rabid changelings fighting to escape their cages. Or he really just wanted to waste their time on purpose. You owe me a debt, Jax reminded him. Relax, old friend. I was just going to say that no one came to us for this job, Chaos said eventually, but I remember about a week ago, I think it was the evening after Noct Never Ending, my potions master received a rare request for a bottle of malefic oil. What's malefic oil? Evangeline asked. It's a very effective method of murder. Chaos replied. It's not typically popular since it takes a particular skill to work with. Most toxins have the same type of effect on every human, making them easily detectable and sloppy instruments of death. But if you have the spell and the preternatural skills to combine malefic oil with the blood, the tears, or the hair of the person you wish to kill, it is only toxic to that person. Eventually tensed, thinking of the last time she'd seen Apollo, his chest covered in a glistening substance that looked like oil. Who asked for the poison? Jax said. I wasn't there when the request was made, Chaos said. I only know it came from a female, and I'd wager she's a witch. It takes a fair amount of power and a spell to properly combine the ingredients. Evangeline instantly thought of Marisol and her cooking spellbooks. But why would Marisol want to kill Apollo? Apollo had given her a new home and restored her reputation. It also didn't make sense for Marisol to go to the trouble of securing a rare toxin that would only work on the prince, and then also poison a bottle of wine with something that could kill anyone who drank from it. Unless two people had been trying to commit murder, that still didn't mean Marisol was involved. The Fortuna matriarch had already tried to kill Evangeline once, although Kristoff had written that the matriarch had suffered from a fall that had stolen some of her memories, making her an unlikely suspect. Is there anything else you can tell us about the woman who bought the oil? Evangeline asked. Chaos toyed with a chain hanging from his neck and shook his head. If that's all you have, this doesn't clear your debt, Jax said. We should leave. Wait, Evangeline's eyes were still on the chain around Chaos's neck. She hadn't noticed it before. When it had been flat against his leather armor, the chain and the medallion at the end of it blended in. But now that the chain was in Chaos's hands, Evangeline could see the aged medallion clearly enough to make out the symbol on it, the head of a wolf wearing a crown. The same symbol that had been burned into the door in the library, the door that all the books on the Valors were locked behind. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but it felt like a clue. Chaos might not have been able to identify Apollo's killer, but what if he knew something about the Valerie Arch and what had really been locked behind it? She knew that wasn't why they were visiting the vampire, but it was the reason Jax had sabotaged the course of her life. Where did you get that medallion? She asked. Chaos looked down as if he weren't even aware of the object he'd been toying with. I took this from Wolfric Valor. We didn't have time for this, Jax groaned. An impressive crash came from the amphitheater. A cage had fallen to the floor. Inside the other room, they all clapped. Evangeline looked out to the balcony. The changeling inside the fallen cage had yet to break the lock, but given the way he fought with it, all tearing fingers and fearless growls, Evangeline doubted this young man would stay in prison much longer. They needed to leave soon, but Chaos had just said he'd taken the medallion around his neck from Wolfric Valor. Chaos had been alive at the same time as the Valors. Jax had told Evangeline that Chaos was as old as the North, but she hadn't realized the implication of that information until now. The excitement must have shown on her face. Beside her, Jax was as taut as a bowstring. Then Chaos was saying, If you're curious about the Valors, I can tell you whatever you want to know. I was there, and I remember the truth. No, Jax's voice seethed inside her head, and for once his ruthless expression matched his words. Don't even think about it. More cages rattled in the background. It won't cost you much, Chaos said. I'll answer any questions you have in exchange for one bite. I thought you couldn't take off your helm. He's trying to get us away so that his changelings will have prey to chase, Jax said. But Evangeline didn't need a warning from Jax to know this was an ill-advised bargain. She might have joked with Jax once about making a deal with another fate, but she wouldn't do it ever again. It was bad enough she still owed Jax a kiss. She didn't want to owe this guy anything. Thank you for the offer, but I think I'd rather leave you before your changeling break free. Chaos dropped the medallion and leaned back in the chair. If you make it out and change your mind, return any time, Princess. Jax didn't give her the chance to finish replaying before he ushered her out the door. The halls of Chaos's underground kingdom were darker than she'd remembered. Half the candles had burned out, covering her and Jax in shadows and smoke as they hurried down the first corridor. Promise me you'll never let him bite you, Jax said. I won't ever need to if you tell me what you want inside the Valerie Arch. I thought you wanted this partnership to be about finding Apollo's killer, not my other goals. Jack's tone hardened as he reached the dining room with all the cages. Evangeline heard the riot of chains before they stepped inside. She hadn't forgotten about the cages there, but she hadn't expected them all to be full of desperate changelings. Dread clutched at her chest like a hand with claws every time one of them called out, I'll make you immortal if you unlock my cage. I'll just take one tiny bite, another promise. Some humans like being bitten. Eva, is that you? The voice had a more soothing timbre than the others, and the familiar sound of it lodged Evangeline's heart into her throat. Luke. She hadn't heard Luke's voice in months, but it sounded just like him, if not a little lovelier. It had to be some sort of trick. Don't stop moving, Jax tugged on her hand, but he should have yanked harder. He should have used his fated strength, because even though Evangeline's head agreed with Jax, her human heart made her stop, pulled her hand free of Jax's hand, looked up at the cage above, and locked eyes with her first love. 42. Something wet dripped down Evangeline's cheek. She was crying, but she couldn't have said why. She didn't know if her emotions were broken and leaking out all over from everything that had happened, or if it was the sight of her once beloved Luke, locked in a cage, eyes staring down at her with something like adoration and terror. "It's really you," Luke said. He gripped the bars with two beautiful brown hands, but he didn't take his eyes off hers. And no power in the world could have forced her to look away from him. It wasn't vampire lure, the shimmering gold flecks in his irises that she didn't remember from before. His eyes weren't exactly the same eyes she knew, but they weren't entirely different either. They were still the impossibly warm brown that had lived in all the memories she tried to shove away but had been unable to forget. "There are so many things I have to tell you, Eva, but I need you to help me out of this cage. If I don't escape by dawn, they'll kill me." "Why are you even here?" she breathed, heart pounding so fast it was hard to form words. It felt like a twisted answer to a wish. "Here's the boy you've spent months pining for, but now he might die, and if you try to help him, you might die." "Little fox," Jack said, "we need to keep moving. He'll tell you whatever he needs to get out of that cage to take a bite out of you." "No, I would never hurt you." Luke's voice was harsher than she remembered, desperate. "Eva, please don't leave. I know you must be terrified, but I won't bite you if you let me out. I don't want to be. I only came here because I was told that the venom was the most powerful healer in the world, and it would erase my scars and wounds." Every inch of his skin was flawless, more perfect than in all her memories, too perfect. It was hard to believe there had ever been any scars, and eventually wanted to tell him that she would not have cared if he had scars all over his person. In fact, she'd have preferred him to this overly polished version of him. But Luke went on before she could. "That's all I wanted, to be healed. His eyes shot around the violent room of cages. The other changelings had gone briefly still. They watched the exchange with rat and human attention. Evangeline didn't want to believe Luke was like them. His voice was pure human emotion, but when she searched beyond his eyes, he looked like the others, dry blood marring the warm brown of his throat and staining the white of his shirt. "I don't want this, I swear." "He's lying." Jax grabbed for Evangeline's wrist and pulled. She couldn't blame him. This wasn't the only room full of almost vampires, but Luke wasn't a vampire yet. "Eva," Luke pleaded. "I know you have every reason to hate me. I know I broke your heart, but I was under a curse." Jack's grip on Evangeline's wrist slipped. "Did you say curse?" she asked, and suddenly Luke was no longer felt like the worked product of a wish. He felt like the truth that she was afraid to touch. Evangeline had felt half mad for the last couple of months, wondering if Luke really was cursed or if she just conjured the idea of a curse as a way to survive this rejection. Jack's cold hand tugged again on hers. Another warning that it was time to go, but Evangeline ignored it. "What kind of curse were you under?" she asked. Luke let go of a bar to run a hand through his hair, a familiar and terribly human gesture that brought another pang to her heart. "I didn't realize it until tonight, until the venom in me. And suddenly my head cleared. I can't describe what it was like before. All I know is that your stepsister was all that I could think about. She was the reason I came here. I needed to be perfect for her. After I got mauled by the wolf, my scars weren't sexy scars." "He just said sexy scars," Jack drawled. "Are you really listening to this?" "Shh," Evangeline hissed. "After I was attacked," Luke said, "your stepsister took one look at me and ran for the house. I tried visiting her when my injuries had improved, but she wouldn't even answer the door. I tried writing, but she wouldn't reply to my letters. She told me it was the other way around." A resentful shake of his head. "She's a liar. If Marisol had written me, I couldn't have ignored her letters, even if I wanted to. She made me desperate to do anything to have her. I was obsessed. It started the same day that I proposed to her. I came to the house to see you, but Marisol was the one to greet me. She took my coat, and I remember her fingers brushing my neck. After that, she was all I could think of." His tone turned disgusted. It was just as Evangeline had believed. She hadn't been delusional or desperate. Luke had only abandoned her and asked Marisol to marry him because he'd been cursed. The only thing she'd been wrong about was who had cast the spell. It wasn't her stepmother, it was Marisol. Evangeline felt as if she'd been punched in her stomach. She thought Marisol was another victim, innocent, the one she needed to make amends to. All this time, Evangeline had been feeling so guilty over ruining Marisol's life. But if this was true, then Marisol had upended Evangeline's life first. She didn't want to jump too quickly to conclusions, but she'd seen her stepsister's spell books. She'd been warned by Jax, the papers, and now by Luke, who never even knew what Evangeline thought. He was cursed. "When I was bitten tonight, it felt like the first time in months I could freely think." Luke's eyes shone as he looked down on her. "I finally felt like myself again, but then I was being dragged into this cage, and now I'll never leave it alive unless you help me. If you're scared, you don't have to unlock it. Just hand me one of the weapons for the wall, and I can break the lock myself. Then I'll prove to you that I don't want to be a vampire. All I want is you, Ava." "Don't even consider it," Jack said. But she stared at Luke one more through the bars. "I can't leave him like this. Evangeline, look at me." Jax cupped her cheeks with his cold hands and met her eyes with a brutal stare as if he could break the spell that Luke had put her under. But she wasn't under any allure. She wasn't sure if all part of her still loved Luke. Her feelings were such a jumbled and chaotic mess. Right now, she primarily felt the need to survive. Love felt like a distant luxury, but she couldn't walk away from Luke and leave him there to die. He was a victim in all of this. He was the one to put under a spell, then turned to stone and attacked by a wolf, and now put in a cage. "This is partly my fault," she whispered to Jax. "No, it's not. I already told you I had nothing to do with the wolf." Jax spoke quietly yet firmly. But even if Jax was telling the truth, that didn't change what she needed to do. She pulled free of his hand. What happened next was a strange blur. Eventually, it still wanted to think she wasn't under a spell, but maybe she was a little entranced, if not by vampire lure. She was feeling the return of her hope. Eventually, knew that Luke could never go back to being what boy he was, and she'd stopped being the girl she was. That girl would have believed in seeing Luke again meant that something wonderful would happen, that they'd receive a happy ending after all. But all this meeting guaranteed was that they would have a different ending. What sort of ending still had to be determined, but it would certainly be better than this. Even if Luke wasn't her happily ever after, she couldn't let their story finish here, with him in this cage and her running away. Evangeline found a blue short sword on the wall with a heavy hilt and a polished blade, and it looked so strong enough to break a lock, but it wasn't too heavy for her to lift. Other changelings cried out asking for weapons and promising all sorts of things in exchange. They'd started battling with their cages again, filling the dining room with a cacophony of violent sounds as Evangeline climbed up onto a chair and used both hands to lift the sword above her head. Luke grabbed the blade, not caring that it sliced into his hands. "Thank you, Eva," he smiled. But it wasn't the crooked, boyish grin that she'd fallen in love with. It was lips pulling back over sharp white fangs that were growing longer. "We're leaving now." Jax took her hand, urging her down from the chair and propelling her into motion. A crash sounded, making her trip over her feet as she started to run. Luke had already broken the lock with the hilt of the weapon. The door to his cage dangled open. He was loose and feral, and the worst mistake she had ever made. "Sorry, Eva." Luke leaped to the ground in a graceful arch, bared his fangs, and lunged for her. Jax shoved her out of the way before she could move. Lightning fast, he darted in front of her like a shield. Luke didn't have time to switch course, and his teeth clamped onto Jack's neck with a sickening tear. "No!" Evangeline screamed and scrambled for the dropped sword she had given to Luke. The weapon felt heavier than it had been moments ago, but it didn't seem necessary. In the time it took her to grab the sword, Jax had taken Luke's head between his hands, and with one sharp twist, he broke Luke's neck. The captives above all booed and hissed as Evangeline's first slab fell to the ground. You killed him," she stammered. "He bit me," Jack snarled, gold-flecked blood dripping from the wound in his throat. "I wish I'd killed him, but I didn't. He's a full-fledged now. The only way to permanently kill one of them is to cut off its head and shove a wooden stake through its heart." Jax reached for the sword in Evangeline's head. She clutched the weapon tighter. A part of her knew she should have let it go. Luke was not her Luke anymore. He'd bitten Jax, and he wouldn't have bitten her. But Luke hadn't killed Jax. "I won't let you end his life," Evangeline said. "Luke is the first boy I loved. I'm not responsible for his choices, but this wouldn't have happened if it weren't for me. Let him live and I'll leave without any more stops or arguments." She dropped the sword and reached for Jax's hand. He recoiled, not letting her touch him, but he didn't argue. He didn't say anything at all. Evangeline and Jax silently left the way they came. She struggled to keep up with Jack's long strides as the rattle of chains and cages continued to chase them, yet it was his silence that was starting to make her uncomfortable. Jax wasn't the sort who'd talk simply to fill the quiet, but Evangeline couldn't shake the feeling that there was more than quiet between them. Minutes ago, he'd saved her life. He had jumped between her and Luke without even thinking. She knew Jax needed her alive because of the Valerie Arch prophecy. But he'd acted out of pure instinct. He'd been scared for her when she'd turned threatened. But now he wouldn't even look at her. His teeth ground together as he took the stairs, jaw tight, eyes focused, knuckles starkly white. Was he in pain from the bite? Was there a smear of blood on his pale neck? But it wasn't that much. Luke wouldn't have worried Jax too deeply. But Luke had bitten him. Jax was probably still testy about that, but that didn't seem quite right. Eventually remembered the way Jax had nearly dropped her wrist earlier. When Luke had said that he'd been cursed, Jax would have thrown off kilter then. Had he been surprised to learn that Luke had truly been under a spell, or had it been something else? Had Jax been unsettled that Evangeline had finally learned the truth about Luke? Luke had said Marisol cursed him. But what if she hadn't achieved it on her own? Evangeline felt a sudden wave of sick on top of everything else. "Did you curse him?" Evangeline asked. "Did you make a deal with Marisol and put a spell on Luke so that—" "You can stop right there," Jax cut in. "I already told you what I think about your stepsister. I did not make a deal with her, and I never will." "Then why were you so alarmed when Luke revealed he'd been under a spell?" "It was a terrible timing. And you have absolutely no sense when it comes to him," Jax all but growled, jaw clenching in between his words. For most people, I'm the worst thing that can happen to them, but not you. It's as if you want that boy to destroy you, and he's only human, or he was until you helped him change. Evangeline wanted to argue. She didn't care that Jax was clearly right about Luke, and that she'd actually believed him about not having made a deal with Marisol, which gave her an unexpected feeling of relief, but Jax still didn't have to be so cruel about it, just because she couldn't shut off her feelings the way he did. She knew there were downsides to feeling deeply. It could get in the way of logic and reason, but shutting off emotions was just as treacherous. Evangeline took her frustration out on the stairs, quickening her pace to pass Jax as they took another flight. They had finally reached the levels where the shackles no longer clung to the walls, and Evangeline could no longer hear the desperate sounds of vampire changelings, and yet she still felt the occasional bite of heat at her throat. Unusually, it hovered right over her pulse, but just then she felt it in the back of her neck. She quickly took another step of steps and reached a well-lit landing where at last she saw the glowing doorway that would take them outside, but the burn at the back of her neck was becoming impossible to ignore. And why couldn't she hear Jax anymore? Jax? Evangeline broke off as she turned. Jax was so close. Too close. Whisper close. She should have heard him right behind her. But he was eerily silent, and his appearance had changed. Your hair, the blue, was gold. Was gone. It was gold once more, shimmering and brilliant and absolutely magnificent. She shouldn't have stared. Staring at Jax was never a good idea, but it was impossible to pull her gaze away. His skin was flushed with color, and his eyes were brighter as well, a radiant sapphire blue. He looked part angel, part fallen star, and completely devastating. Evangeline, stop looking at me like that. You're making this much more difficult. Jax spoke between clenched teeth, and she still caught a glimpse of his sharpened incisors, which now looked startlingly like fangs. There are two different types of bites, Chaos had said. We can bite a human merely to feed from them, or we can infect our bites with vampire venom to turn a human into a... She sucked in a sharp breath. Luke hadn't just bitten Jax to feed. He infected you with venom. 43. Jax took an eerily silent step back, leather boots soundless against the stone floors. You should go, he edged out, fangs lengthening as he spoke. He eventually became very aware of the blood rushing through her veins, the pounding of her heart. If she ever saw Luke again, she would use a sword. She might not be able to cut off his head, but she would definitely be able to cut him. Why aren't you leaving? Jack's nostrils flared, and Evangeline felt another bolt of heat over her, pulse further dimming the brief spell she'd been under. Jax was not part fallen angel. He was on the verge of becoming something so much worse. She curled her toes inside of her boots, fighting the urge to slowly back away or burst into a run. If he bit her, she would change into it. He hated that, and she didn't like them much either, but if she left him now and he found another human before dawn, she didn't know if he'd be able to exert the same level of control he seemed to possess with her. He had gone very still. The only parts of him that moved were his pupils, dilating until his eyes were nearly full black. Luke's eyes hadn't done that, but again, Luke hadn't been a fate when he'd been infected. Do you want to be? Evangeline asked. No, Jack spat. I don't want to be, but I do want to bite you. Evangeline's skin was hot all over. Jax ground his teeth, looking furious at her for still being there. You should go, he repeated. I'm not leaving you like this. Evangeline searched the entryway for shackles. You're not pinning me to a wall, Jax glared. Do you have a better suggestion? An unsettling victory cry echoed below. Another changeling was probably free. The noise sounded as if it was a decent way underground, but Evangeline wondered if the changelings might sense where she was, but somehow was aware there was a human nearby. How good is your sense of smell? She asked. Jack's nostrils flared again. You smell like fear, and something unreadable flickered across his face, but whatever he was going to say next became cut off by another sound from below, like thunder racing up the stairs. Without another word, both of them darted for the exit. Outside, the chilly winter night was almost too bright. The moon had come out from hiding behind the clouds to pay particular attention to Jax, illuminating his perfect jaw, his long lashes, and the twist of his petulant mouth. He looked like ethereal heartbreak. She kept feeling the urge to turn her head and take just one more glimpse, and she knew it was vampire lure. The inescapable draw of dangerous beauty and power. Why aren't you running away? He asked. Given the way you keep looking at me, I imagine you'll give chase or you'll find another human who you wouldn't feel guilty about biting. I wouldn't feel guilty about biting you. Evangeline didn't know if the voice in her head was a threat or a lapse in Jax's control, or just a warning that she was running out of time. You should go, he repeated. She ignored him and scoured the darkened graveyard once more. A desperate but possibly inspired idea occurred as Evangeline caught sight of a mausoleum covered in flowering vines of angel tears that glowed milky white beneath the moon. There, she pointed toward the structure. We'll go inside. Families plant angels' tears when they want to protect the bodies of loved ones from demonic spirits. She knew because she'd done it for both of her parents. This mausoleum is covered for the plant, which means there are probably other protections inside, like a gate with a lock to keep coffins safe. A muscle in Jack's neck throbbed. You wish to lock me in a coffin? Not a coffin, just on the other side of the gate. Only until dawn. I don't need to be locked up. I can control myself. Then why do you keep telling me to run? She lifted her eyes to meet Jack's stare. A split second later, Jack pinned her against the closest tree. Her back hit the wood, his fevered chest pressed to hers, and his hands went for her throat, burning fire-hot against her skin. Jax, Evangeline gasped, let me go. He moved away as quickly as he grabbed her. She slumped against the tree from the force of his release. When she righted herself, he was stalking toward the crypt. Evangeline rubbed her neck as she followed. He hadn't held her that tightly, but her skin still felt scorched from the touch of his hands. I thought they were supposed to be cold. Jax was always cold. The venom is hot, especially when they're hungry, Jax rasped as he hanked open the door to the mausoleum. As she'd suspected, the chamber had been built by the superstitious. Ever-lit torches clung to the walls, providing some warmth and casting a glow on an excellent floor-to-ceiling iron gate that separated any would-be visitors from the 4 stone coffins on the opposite side of it. What now? He said roughly. Evangeline quickly approached the gate. She didn't recognize all the protective iron symbols that had been worked into the design, but the bars looked thick enough to hold Jax, at least for several more hours until the sun decided to rise. She wished the lock on the gate were stronger, but it would have to do. Do you see a key hanging from the wall? She asked. No, Jack's voice was tight. Then barely audibly, try your hand, stab one of your fingers to draw blood, then ask the door to open. Evangeline spun around. Jax was pressed against the farthest wall, skin a painful shade of pale white. She didn't make the mistake of meeting his eyes again, but one glance at his face and it was clear he was barely holding himself back. She had been planning to ask if he was just trying to get her to spill blood, but she thought better of wasting more time. Pricking her finger on one of the iron gate's sharper designs, she drew a drop of blood and quickly pressed it to the lock. Open, please. It worked magic fast. The lock split, the door swung wide, and Evangeline's jaw dropped. How did you know that would work? She asked. Jax moved too quickly for Evangeline to see. This isn't the time or place to talk about it, he said from the other side of the gate, and then he slammed it shut. The lock she just opened closed with a tiny click, making her painfully aware of how little stood between her and Jax. He seemed mindful of it as well. He'd willingly entered the cage, but now he regarded the lock like a thief, contemplating all the ways he could break it. 44. If Jax decided he wanted to break free of his prison, Evangeline doubted it would take much effort. She needed to find a way to distract him. She could question him about something he found interesting. She wanted to ask him more about the lock and why her blood had opened it, but he'd already shot that subject down. She also wondered if she already knew the answer, if her ability to magically open the lock had something to do with the Valerie Arch. When Apollo had told her about the prophecy that had locked the arch, he'd said that once every line of it was fulfilled, it would create a key that would open the arch. What if she was that key? Could it be possible? Or was it just that all the wild events of tonight were finally getting to Evangeline and giving her delusions of magical wonder? Only it didn't feel like a delusion when she thought back to every time she'd stepped through an arch. All of them had whispered to her, words that made much more sense if she was this prophesied key. We're so pleased you found us. We've been waiting for you. You could have unlocked me as well. An uncomfortable thrill kicked through her. She didn't want anything to do with the Valerie Arch. She definitely didn't want to be its key, even if this ability had helped her save her life just now. Although if she wanted to stay alive, she had to keep Jax occupied. Fortunately, Evangeline was not at a loss for questions. There was one in particular that had been gnawing at her for a while. Tell me what happened between you and the princess from the Meridian Empire, the one Chaos and Lala mentioned earlier, Donatella. No, Jack's voice was pure vitriol. I don't want to talk about her ever. The subject would be perfect. Earlier, Jax had merely flinched and then quickly masked his expression whenever the princess was mentioned, but either he was having issues with control, or the vampire venom was making his emotions even stronger. Evangeline could once again feel the pressure of Jack's glare, but it was no longer on her neck or her pulse. It was dancing heat all over her. Tough luck, Jax. Evangeline folded her arms across her chest as he prowled back and forth inside his cage. You need something to distract you, so I'm going to talk about Princess Donatella. I don't care if you tell me how much you hate her or how much you love her. You can sing verses about how pretty she is or the color of her hair. Jax made a strangled sound that might have been some estranged cousin of a laugh. She's not the kind of girl you sing about, and yet something in his voice shifted, softened, and eventually created an oddly uncomfortable sensation that he actually would have sung songs about this girl. The first time I met her, she threatened to throw me from a sky carriage. And you liked her for that? Evangeline asked. I just threatened to kill her. He said it as if they'd been flirting. This is a terrible love story, Jax. Who said it was a love story? His tone turned back to acid. Evangeline thought he might even stop talking. To her surprise, he continued. When we met again, I kissed her. The way he said I kissed her was like the way someone else might have said they'd stabbed a person in the back. There was nothing longing or romantic about it, confirming Jax had a misshapen definition of love, and yet somehow the thought of Jax kissing the princess made something painful wrench inside Evangeline. Did you kiss her because you thought she was your true love? No, I needed something from her, and I told her that my kiss would kill her unless she got me what I wanted. Wait, are you saying that your kiss isn't deadly if you don't want it to be? Careful, little fox, you sound curious, but you shouldn't be. Jack stopped pacing and drummed his long fingers against the iron gate, tapping a staccato sound. I lied to Donatella. My kiss is always deadly. I slowed her heart so that it didn't kill her immediately, but it should have ended her life in a matter of days, whether or not she did what I wanted. Then why didn't she die? Probably because my heart started beating, Jack said flippantly, as if it were a small detail that could have easily been left out of the story. When there were entire stories dedicated to Jack's unbeating heart and the mythical girl that would finally make it beat again. His one true love. Evangeline felt that terribly painful something churning inside her once again. Not that the idea of this girl being Jack's true love should have pained her. She didn't even like Jax. She shouldn't have been bothered that another girl had made Jack's heart beat. She should have been happy the princess hadn't died. Maybe Evangeline was just feeling sorry for Jax because she already knew that the story didn't end well. What happened then? According to the stories, she was supposed to be my one true love, Jax confirmed. His voice was mocking, but it didn't hide the pain clipping his words or hardening the edges of his features. Of course, as you probably guessed, that didn't work out. She never forgave me for that first kiss. She fell in love with someone else, and then she stabbed me in the heart with my own knife. Evangeline took a shuddering breath, unable to imagine how such a thing would feel, especially for Jax, whose entire driving force as a fate was to find his one true love. Evangeline could understand that drive. In fact, she understood it far better than she wanted to admit. She wanted to say she'd never risked killing someone for love. But she had made a deal with Jax that had turned a wedding party to stone, cursed a prince, and ultimately led her here. She kept thinking it was fate or Jax who was toying with her life, but it had been her own questionable choices that had started her on this path. With Luke, she told herself that she was acting out of love, but she was not. Not really. She wasn't making love choices. She was making compromising choices because she wanted love. Luke wasn't her weakness, love was. Not even just love, but the idea of it. This was why part of Jack's stories had twisted so painfully inside her. It wasn't because she wanted Jax. She didn't want Jax. She just wanted someone to want her the way Jax had wanted this girl. And she didn't want it to be because of a spell or a curse. Evangeline wanted a real love powerful enough to break the spell, which was exactly what Jax wanted too. He leaned his head against the dark iron gate, and Evangeline would forever remember the way he looked just then. He was still indescribably breathtaking, but it was all the tragic beauty of a sky where every single star was falling. His hair was a storm of broken gold. His eyes were a mess of silver and blue. The deadness she'd seen her first night in Valorfell was gone, but now she understood why it had been there, why he seemed so unable to give comfort or kindness. The girl who was supposed to be his one true love had literally stabbed him in the heart. I'm sorry Donatella wounded you so badly, Evangeline said, and she meant it. She imagined Jax was probably leaving a few things out, but she believed his heart was genuine. Maybe the stories have it wrong and there's another true love waiting for you. Jax laughed derisively. Are you saying this because you think you can be her? He eyed Evangeline through the bars. Gay's bordering on indecent. Do you want to kiss me, little fox? Something new and terrible knotted up inside her. No, that's not what I'm saying. You don't sound too sure about that. You might not like me, but I bet you'd like it if I kissed you. His eyes went to her lips, and the heat that swept across her mouth felt like the beginning of a kiss. Jack, stop it, she demanded. She didn't really want to kiss. He didn't really want to kiss her. He was just teasing her to deflect the pain. I know what you're doing. I doubt it, he smiled, flashing his dimples as he ran his tongue over the tip of a very sharp and long incisor, looking suddenly thoughtful. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to stay like this. I rather like these. You also like the daylight, Evangeline reminded him. I could probably live without the sun if I could trade it for other things. He cocked his head. I wonder, if I were to become a true, maybe my kiss wouldn't be fatal anymore. His fangs lengthened. You could let me bite you, and we could try it out. Another piercing lick of heat, this time right beneath her jaw, then her wrist, and a few other intimate places she had never thought anyone would bite. Evangeline blushed from her neck down to her collarbone. We're not talking about biting, she said hotly. Then what should we talk about? Jack's eyes returned to her lips, and the more heat slipped between them as they parted. Evangeline sucked in a deep, sharp breath. Maybe she'd been wrong earlier. Maybe he did want to kiss her, but it didn't mean anything. He was still clearly fixated on Princess Donatella, and Lala had said that Jack's curse was his kiss. If there was even a sliver of attraction, he'd be tempted to kiss, but it didn't mean he possessed any real feelings for the person. I'm curious, she asked. If you have the ability to control people, why didn't you just use it to make the princess love you? Jack's taunting smile vanished. I did. What happened? I think my turn is over, he said sharply. Your turn now, and I want you to tell me about Luke. Evangeline winced. She really didn't want to discuss Luke now, not after what had just happened, and not with Jax, who had teased her about him the moment she met him. I'd like another question, please. No, I answered your question. You're answering mine. Why do you want to know about Luke? You just saw how the story ends. Tell me how it started. Jax gave her one corner of a falsely cheerful smile. Your tale clearly began on better footing than mine. What made you fall so madly in love with him that you were willing to pray to me? Evangeline took a deep breath. Stop stalling, little fox, or I might remember how much pain I'm in because all I can think about is tasting your blood. Jack's eyes lowered. The wave of heat attacked her chest directly over her heart, and this time it felt like a bite, not a kiss. Fine. Luke was there for me when my father died. This was why you fell in love with him? No, I think I loved him before that. She was tempted to say that she loved him the first time she saw him, but Jax would definitely mock her for that. At first, I thought he was handsome. I still remember the bell outside the shop door rang a full 2 seconds before the first time he walked inside, as if it, too, thought he was special. Or it was trying to warn you away from him, Jax groaned. Do you want me to keep going or not? Jax mimed, sealing his lips shut. Evangeline doubted it would last, but he surprised her by making a genuine effort to listen politely. She noticed that Jack's knuckles were white from clenching his fists, and his jaw appeared uncomfortably tight. He was struggling more now that he wasn't talking, but he hopped atop one of the stone coffins and sat cross-legged like a child being told a story. Eventually wondered if she should stay standing, in case she needed to run, but maybe it would put him at more ease if she mirrored his lead. Carefully, she sat down on the cold, damp ground, giving her tired legs a rest. I grew up working on my father's curiosity shop. I loved it. It felt more like my home than any other place in the world, but I spent so much time there that I didn't really have close friends outside of it until I met Luke. At first I thought he just liked oddities. Then one day he came in and he didn't buy anything. He just said he wanted to see me, and he wasn't too proud or afraid to admit it. And? Jax prompted. That was when I knew I loved him. All he did was tell you he liked you? Jax sounded disappointed. That was his grand gesture? Haven't any other boys been nice to you? Plenty of young men have been nice to me, but Luke made other grand gestures. Jax scowled. Tell me about these grand gestures. Evangeline squirmed against the cold ground and tried to tuck her legs more comfortably beneath her. Jax would think that every relationship needed some magnificent gesture to validate it. Not every love needs to make a great story, Jax. The start of my romance with Apollo had the makings of an epic love tale, but you saw how badly that ended. So you're saying you'd settle for a boring romance if it ends well? Yes, I would gladly take an uneventful happily ever after. Jax smirked. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't have been happy with Luke, and definitely not forever. The two of you aren't well suited. He's not half as strong as you. He didn't even hesitate before he tried to bite you, and he wouldn't have turned himself to stone to save you. You don't know that. Yes, I do. There's always a way to break a curse. As soon as you drank from Poison's goblet, it refilled. I didn't stay to explain the rules, but they would have appeared on the side of the cup. Luke could have saved you if he wanted. Evangeline's hand started trembling. No one had told her this. That doesn't mean anything. Luke was under a love spell from Marisol. He could have broken it, Jack said bluntly. If he had really loved you, the spell could have been broken. I've seen it happen. Stop it, Jax, Evangeline shoved up to her feet. It was bad enough to know she'd done so much for love. She didn't want to hear that Luke had never really loved her. I'm not trying to be cruel, little fox. No, Jax, that's exactly what you're doing. It's what you always do. It was also what she'd expected, and she was too tired to take it anymore. She might have made questionable choices for love, but Jax hurt people on purpose, for fun. Maybe the real reason Donatella stabbed you in the heart and chose to love someone else wasn't just because of that almost fatal first kiss you gave her. Maybe it was your inability to understand any emotions that are remotely human. Jax flinched. He was quick to cover it up, but it was hard to fully see, even with all the torches, but Evangeline could have sworn his cheeks had filled with streaks of color. She felt a stitch of guilt, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. I bet you never even apologized for kissing her, and that's probably not even the worst thing you did. I mean, isn't your idea of romantic kissing a girl and then waiting to see whether or not she dies? I know the stories say that your kisses are worth dying for, but how can they say that if everyone dies? Who wrote those stories? Did you write them to make yourself feel better? Jax wiped his face of all emotion, slid off the coffin, and stalked up to the bars. You sound jealous. If you think I'm jealous because someone else got to stab you, then you're right. Prove it. She heard the thump of his dagger as it fell at her feet. It was the jeweled one he carried everywhere. So many of the gems were missing, but the nice hilt still glittered in the torchlight, pulsing blue and purple, the color of blood before it was spilled. What am I supposed to do with this? You might want to use it, little fox. The corner of his mouth twitched as he slowly slid his pale hands through the bars of the gate and broke the lock in half. It could have been a twig, a piece of paper, or her. 45. Before Evangeline could suck in a breath, Jax was directly in front of her, his lips curved into a devastating smile that on anyone else might have looked inviting or flirtatious, as if throwing a knife at her feet and daring her to stab him was the equivalent of asking her to dance. Jax, Evangeline tried not to sound as if her heart was racing. Don't you want to hurt me any more, little fox? His finger reached out and lightly traced her exposed collarbone, setting every inch of her skin on fire. You can pick up the dagger any time now. But Evangeline couldn't pick up the dagger. She could barely manage to keep breathing. His hand was now at the hollow of her throat, careful and caressing. Jax had touched her before. Last night he had held her while she slept. But he'd acted as if that had been torture. His touch hadn't been warm or curious. Or maybe she was the one who was curious. She knew she shouldn't be. But hadn't she wondered what it would be like to be wanted with the intensity that Jax seemed to want things? His mouth curved wider as his hands moved from her throat to her shoulders and slowly slid the cape away, leaving more of her skin exposed. You should go back on the other side of the gate. Her voice was hoarse. You're the one who said I needed a distraction. His fingers drifted lower, trailing down her chest to the sensitive stretch of skin right above the lacy line of her corset. Isn't this better than talking? One finger dipped all the way into the corset. Her breathing hitched. I don't think this is a good idea. That's what makes it interesting. His other hand found her jaw, while the other finger in her corset gently stroked just above her heart, coaxing it to beat even faster. You can always pick up the blade, he taunted. You wouldn't like me as a vampire, little fox. The warm hand at her jaw tilted her head back until she met his eyes. They were dilated to nearly full black, and somehow still as bright as broken stars. She needed to back away. This was wrong for so many reasons, and worse than that, it was incredibly stupid to let him keep touching her, to like the way he kept touching her. He wouldn't even be doing this if it weren't for the venom. It didn't matter that he was being gentle or that his knuckles were barely brushing her skin as they skimmed their way from her chest to the back of her neck, while his other hand traveled to her hips, slowly gliding over her skirts as he eased her closer. The crypt was freezing, but Jax was warm enough to heat every inch of Evangeline as the hand at her neck slid into her hair, twisting his fingers around the strands before shoving them away from her neck, and his teeth grazed her pulse. Jax! It was suddenly impossible to form words. His hot mouth was against her throat, and his teeth were on her skin. His teeth, Evangeline finally pressed against his chest, but it was as useless as trying to battle a block of marble. Hot, sculpted marble. She wanted to tell him not to bite her, but saying the word bite didn't seem like the wisest idea just then. You won't want this later. Not really thinking about later. He licked her, one languorous stroke up the column of her neck. She gasped. You don't even like me. I like you right now. I like you a lot. He gently sucked her skin. In fact, I can't think of anything I like more. Jax, this is all from the venom. She pressed harder against his chest, frantic, but he didn't seem to notice. His tongue was on her neck, toying with her pulse. Her words faltered as his teeth grazed her again, raking over all the sensitized skin in a way that should not have felt so incredibly good. She had to stop this. One bite, one spilled drop of blood, and they'd both be in trouble. If you do this, you'll never see the sun again. Won't you miss the sun? His only response was another torturous lick, and then his other hand was tightening around her hips, pulling her closer as if preparing to. You need me to open the Valerie Arch. Jack stilled at her words. His breath went jagged as his lips hovered over her pulse. He didn't bite her, but he didn't release her. If anything, he held her tighter. He was burning up against her. She tried to calm her breathing, certain that he would feel her racing heartbeat and hear the blood rushing in her veins beneath his parted mouth, but he didn't lower his lips. He didn't move except to breathe in and out. She didn't know how long they stood there, wrapped in an embrace that she couldn't fight, and that Jax couldn't seem to let go of. There were moments he struggled. He tangled her hair in his fingers, their cold tips brushing her scalp. Cold, his palm was cold. Eventually dared to look up as morning sunlight crept through the mausoleum window. They'd survived the night. Jack's arms tensed as if he had just had the same realization. Everything that had burned suddenly felt like ice. His chest, his arms, his breath upon her neck. He extricated himself from her slowly with stiff, ungraceful movements. He was once again the Jax who carried her to Lala's flat. The heat, the want, the hunger, all of it had vanished with the night. His hands were awkward as he untangled his fingers from her hair. It was eerily reminiscent of when Apollo had been freed from Jax's magic, only Jax wasn't angry, just exquisitely uncomfortable. At least he wasn't laughing. Evangeline didn't think she could have borne it if he'd teased her, or for letting him get so close, or for gasping as he licked her neck. Her cheeks were suddenly burning, and she was grateful that he didn't look at her when he bent down to grab his dagger. She took a moment to turn, smooth her hair, and take a deep breath, inhaling the cool, crisp morning instead of him. Here. Jack's voice was right behind her, and then she felt her ruffled cloak. He placed it across her shoulders and quickly secured the straps to her corset. If you freeze to death, the trouble I've gone to keeping you alive will be wasted. His mocking tone was back, clipped and cutting, and yet she felt the soft brush of his fingertips lingering against her neck before he pulled away. Evangeline tried not to react. She wasn't even sure he realized he'd done it. When she spun to face him again, he was back to being indifferent as he strode toward the mausoleum exit. She started to follow, and then she saw it, glittering against the ground. The dagger he'd tossed at her last night. The one with all the broken gems. He'd picked up her cloak, but he'd left the little knife. Wait! Jax looked at her over his shoulder. She picked up the blade and held it out. A ghost of a frown turned down his mouth. She couldn't read the look in his eyes, but his tone was brusque. Leave it. He disappeared through the door without another glance. Evangeline closed her hand around the dagger's jeweled hilt. She was going to keep it, but she didn't let herself wonder why. A layer of icy dew covered the cemetery grounds, and an army of tiny dragons covered the tops of the tombstones, snoring little sparks that tempered the air from frosty to chilled. Jack scrubbed a hand over his face. There were bruising circles beneath his eyes that hadn't been there before. We need to get somewhere safe, he said. What if we went back to Wolf Hall, she suggested. He gave her a look that could have withered a forest. Do you want to be locked up in a dungeon? You didn't let me finish. I've been thinking about what Chaos told us. If Apollo was actually killed by his malefic oil, and not Lala's tears, then the witch who bought the oil from Chaos and poisoned Apollo with it might have been my stepsister. Jax narrowed his eyes. Or were they drooping? He really did look exhausted. She was weary too, but it was piled deep beneath a number of far more urgent feelings and needs, like figuring out who killed Apollo. And after Luke's revelation, Evangeline was becoming more inclined to think that the murder was her stepsister, but did she only think this because Luke had said that Marisol had cursed him? Or was it because Marisol was actually guilty? I'm not entirely sure why Marisol would have wanted to poison Apollo, Evangeline admitted, but I keep wondering about that spellbook she bought. I was thinking we could sneak back to Wolf Hall, and you could use your powers on her to compel her to tell us the truth. Even if I thought this was a good idea, which I don't, I couldn't help you, Jax trailed off, slurring his words at the end. Are you all right? Evangeline asked. He met her gaze and yawned. He struggled briefly before pausing to rub his eyes. I'm fine, just tired from, he swayed on his feet. Jax, she reached out a hand to steady him. He flinched away. I'm fine, he repeated, but even those words were marred by a yawn. You're falling asleep on your feet. I don't, Jax yawned again, mouth stretching wide as his eyes fell all the way shut. Jax, she quickly shook him awake. He blinked at her, fuzzy-eyed, as if he were intoxicated. Nothing about him was sharp. He was all soft around the edges, with his tousled golden hair and his drowsy blue eyes. It might have been amusing under other circumstances, And it was a little comical now. She pictured it as a scandal sheet headline: "The Prince of Hearts slayed by sleep, dispatched by a nap, destroyed by dreaming." This fatigue did not seem natural. "Jax, I think there's something wrong with you." "That's not anything new." He gave her a slow, impish smile. "I just need to find a bed." He staggered from her to the closest cemetery plot, as if it would suffice. "Oh no," she grabbed his solid arm and tugged him back toward her. But she didn't know how long she could keep fighting him. If Jax actually chose to lie down, she was not strong enough to pick him up. "You can't sleep here, Jax. Just for a bit, little fox." His pale eyelids fluttered up and down. "This is probably just a side effect of the venom," he murmured. "There's always a cost to unearned power." He swayed toward the ground. She grabbed his shoulders to steady him once again. "Side effect or not, they couldn't stay here. We need to get somewhere safe, remember? Tell me where you're living." Instead of answering, Jax pulled away and sagged against a nearby tree covered in posters with her likeness. They seemed to have multiplied overnight, growing like a paper plague. Only now they didn't simply say she was missing. "Evangeline Fox, wanted for murder." Princess Evangeline Fox, formerly known as Valinda's savior sweetheart, is wanted for the murder of her husband, Crown Prince Apollo Titus Arcadian. Believed to be highly dangerous and possibly in possession of magical abilities. If you spot the princess, do not approach her. Contact the Royal Order of Soldiers immediately. Evangeline didn't know if she wanted to scream or cry or just let Jax curl up with her, as if she were his blanket. It wasn't enough that her parents had died, that her first love had been cursed by her stepsister, that she'd been turned to stone, that she'd lost her father's curiosity shop, and that she'd married a prince who was cursed and then killed. Now they were officially blaming her for his murder. "Jax, please come back to your senses. I'm no longer missing. I'm wanted for murder." She shook him until he opened his eyes. But if she'd expected a coherent reply, she would have been disappointed. Jack's only response was to rip down the poster and shut his eyes again. It was not easy to get Jax out of the graveyard, and it was even more challenging to find where he lived. Whenever Evangeline had asked about his home, Jax kept shaking his golden head, saying, "Lala's is closer." Unfortunately, either Lala's flat had moved during the night, or Evangeline was too anxious to be any good with directions. She climbed back to the spires, but she couldn't find Lala's home among the many shops and stacked cottages. It didn't help that as they scaled the endless steps, Jax kept slumping against the Norris doors and walls and muttering about apples. She risked buying a few pieces of fruit from a vendor, but after taking one bite, Jax dropped it and leaned heavily against her shoulder. Her heart fluttered at the contact, which was the absolute wrong response. A woman carrying a load of wash stared at the two of them a little longer than would have been deemed polite, and Evangeline's panic increased. They needed to find somewhere to hide. They couldn't keep wandering around like this. Someone would figure out who they were and call the royal soldiers. The world was waking up with each passing second. The cries of vendors selling papers and clams and morning sea tonics were filling with the bustling streets below. She tried to shut out all the noise and concentrate on finding a safe place to hide, but Evangeline kept hearing the sound of a bell merrily ringing, an endless string of tinkling sounds as if to say, "Look at me, look at me." Evangeline, of course, knew that bells could not speak, but her mother had told her bells had a sixth sense. She said to always polish them, always mind what you say in front of them, and always listen to bells that ring when they shouldn't. Evangeline cast about the spire until she saw the cheery iron bell wildly swinging back and forth above a closed black door with a sign that said, "Go away." Ding, ding, ding. The bell didn't stop until Evangeline briefly left Jax, approached the door, and knocked. No one answered. The bell kept ringing more furiously. Evangeline tried the knob. It didn't budge. The door was locked. But no one seemed to be inside. Hoping the bell was doing her a favor and showing her a place to hide, Evangeline pulled out of Jack's dagger and pricked her finger with the tip. "Please open." The knob turned with a gentle click. Evangeline quickly found Jax curled up in front of the nearest door, clutching a scandal sheet to his chest like a blanket. "Come on now." She crouched down to slip an arm under his shoulder. And for once, he didn't fight her or try to drag her with him to the ground. His head lolled against her as she walked him toward the black door, slouching under his weight. "You're so lucky I'm here," she grunted. "Luck has nothing to do with it," Jax mumbled. "I wanted you here, little fox. Who do you think asked Poison to save you and suggest to his empress that she send you to Noct Neverending?" 47. Evangeline and Jack stumbled through the door together. The room was cold, and she thought it held the scent of apples, but that might have just been Jack's. A skylight proved just enough illumination for Evangeline to see walls of haphazard bookshelves broken up by a fireplace, a scuffed desk piled high with papers, a sofa of dark amber velvet, and a pair of mismatched armchairs. They'd stumbled into someone's private library. She had hoped the owner didn't return while they were hiding there. As soon as the door shut behind them, Jack pulled away and fell on top of the sofa, head resting against one of its velvet arms, long legs dangling off the end. Jax, she tried to shake him away, hoping she could get him to answer at least one more question before he fully succumbed to sleep. If he'd been more alert, he would have never admitted to asking poison to cure her or help lure her to the north. Not that she was entirely shocked. She'd gathered from her first night there that Jax had been expecting her. "Tell me more," she softened her voice. Maybe she could get him to think she was only part of a dream. "Tell me what you want inside the Valerie Arch." Evangeline stopped shaking his shoulder and smoothed back a lock of golden hair that had fallen across his sleeping face. She wondered why he'd dyed it before. If he'd been in disguise, the blue was a terrible choice. It was far too bold and arresting. Not that the brilliant gold was easy to ignore. Even without the vampire lure, it tempted her to stare, and it felt incredibly soft against her thawing fingers as she ran them through. Jack's hand covered hers, cold and firm atop her fingers. "Bad idea," he murmured. She snatched her hand away. She hadn't meant to touch him like that. Jax was not a thing to idly touch. He wasn't even a thing she liked. Although as soon as she had the thought, she knew it wasn't true. Not anymore. Evangeline wasn't ready to say they were friends, but after last night, she no longer felt as if they were enemies. An enemy wouldn't have spent the night with someone to make sure he didn't turn into a vampire. And an enemy wouldn't have held her quite so close or tasted her neck like the way Jax had. Evangeline knew he wanted to bite her, but his tongue on her neck hadn't been just about biting. She didn't want to think too much about it, sort of like the jeweled dagger she'd taken from the crypt and placed in the sheath at her hip. She was glad Jax no longer felt like her enemy, but it would be dangerous to let it go further and consider him a friend. Evangeline allowed herself one small smile as she felt the ruffled cape he placed across her shoulders. Then she stepped away from him. A paper rustled under her foot, the newsprint Jax had been holding. She thought before that he'd clutched the crumpled black and white sheet like a blanket because he'd been so tired. It probably repeated the news that she was wanted for murder, but one glance at the headline changed her mind. The Daily Rumor, The Cursed Bride and the New Crown Prince, by Christoph Neitlinger. It's official, the new Crown Prince, Tiberius Peregrine Arcadian, is engaged to Marisol Antoinette Tourmaline, also known as the Cursed Bride. I know many of you will find this difficult to believe, but I would not have printed these words without confirmation from Prince Tiberius himself. "It was love at first sight," he said. "The moment I laid eyes on Marisol Tourmaline, I knew that we were meant to be together. I heard whispers that many members of the royal court are upset that Prince Tiberius plans to wed before his brother's body is even in the grave. Of course, there are also rumors Prince Apollo's body has gone missing. But no one in Wolf Hall is talking about that. The wedding will take place tomorrow morning, and one can't help but wonder why this event is happening so soon," continued on page 6. Evangeline did not have page 6. But she didn't need to continue reading. She had been trying to give Marisol the benefit of the doubt. She didn't want her stepsister to be a murderer or a monster, but all Evangeline could think was that Marisol had used another love potion to put Tiberius under a spell, and Evangeline feared that that wasn't the only thing her stepsister had done. Evangeline had suspected Marisol of Apollo's murder, but she hadn't been able to think of a reason why her stepsister would want to murder Prince Apollo until now. With Apollo dead, Tiberius was the crown prince. Once he married Marisol, he would become king and Marisol would be queen. It would have been easier to just put a spell on Apollo, but perhaps Marisol had tried and it hadn't worked because Apollo was already under Jack's influence, or Marisol just found Tiberius more attractive. It was hard for Evangeline to really comprehend any of it. When Evangeline thought of Marisol, she remembered the way she'd hugged her before the wedding as if they were really sisters. But what if that hadn't been an "I love you" hug? Maybe it had been an "I'm sorry, I'm going to kill you" hug. It was still a little incomprehensible to think that her stepsister had tried to murder her. But Evangeline had also never imagined that it was Marisol who had cursed Luke, yet she'd done it. Marisol had also acquired northern books of magic so dangerous Lala and Jax acted as if Marisol was a villain just for owning them. Marisol could have easily been the witch who'd gone to Chaos's crypt for the malefic oil. The motive was the only thing that didn't feel entirely right to Evangeline. She could understand her stepsister putting a love spell on someone, but she couldn't imagine Marisol killing multiple people for a crown. That didn't seem like something Marisol would do. But maybe Evangeline didn't really know what things Marisol would do. Evangeline flashed back to the horrible words she'd overheard Agnes say. Look at you, your complexion, your hair, your posture is like a damp ribbon, and those circles beneath your eyes are hideous. A man might be able to overlook your little cursed reputation if you were something to look at, but I can barely tolerate the sight. Evangeline believed in love and fairy tales and happy endings because that was what her parents had taught her. But Agnes had told Marisol that she was unattractive and unwanted. Was that why she had done all this? It was all so ugly either way. Jax, wake up! Evangeline put a hand on his chest, hoping the touch might jolt him awake, but his sleep was so deep. She might have suspected him dead if not for the rise and fall of his chest and the steady beat of his heart. His heart! It really was beating. It might have felt a little slower than a human heartbeat, but Evangeline didn't let her hand linger. She would have liked this help for this, but if he didn't wake up soon, she couldn't spare the time to wait for him. It wasn't just that Evangeline needed to prove her innocence or that she wanted to save Tiberius from the person who might have murdered his brother. Evangeline wasn't physically capable of merely sitting in this lost library and waiting. She needed to know if she was right about Marisol, and she knew exactly how to do it. There was a way to prove if Marisol was either innocent or guilty. Evangeline needed to find a cure for a love spell. If it worked on Tiberius, it would reveal Marisol's guilt. The same for her innocence if the cure failed, but Evangeline would have to work quickly to discover a cure and administer it before tomorrow morning's wedding. According to Luke, vampire venom could break a love spell, but Evangeline didn't want to risk another visit to chaos, and infecting Tiberius with vampire venom might cause more harm than good. She'd have to find another way. After lighting a fire on the hearth, Evangeline wandered closer to the bookshelves. It seemed a little too coincidental that she find a spell book with an antidote for a love potion, but at least it was a place to start. Tall and scuffed, the bookshelves nearly covered 3/4 of the library's walls, and their owner did not care much for organization. For example, the first wall of shelves nearest to the front door Evangeline found a number of different books about time travel, but none of them were grouped together. They were scattered haphazardly, placed next to volumes on topics like the color blue and how to write poetry, and an encyclopedia for the letter E. Having determined these shelves did not hold any spell books or cookbooks disguised as spell books, she moved on. She was about to attack another set of shelves when she noticed the desk in the corner, or more specifically, the pop of color that came from the bottles of Fortuna's fantastically flavored water sitting on top of the desk. They came in 4 flavors: luck, curiosity, sunshine, and gratitude, and all were tied together with an elaborate purple bow that clashed with the rest of the room. She shouldn't have touched the bottles. They were clearly a gift, but one look at their brilliant colors, and she couldn't help herself from picking up a cerulean blue bottle of curiosity. Her throat went suddenly dry as she tried to remember the last time she'd had something to drink. She'd never tried Fortuna's fantastically flavored water, but she'd seen it on several occasions, and like the bottle's label, she was curious. The liquid bubbled on her tongue, and it tasted like cotton and safety pins. It was far from a fantastic flavor, and yet she finished the entire drink. She meant to put the bottle back and return to her task, but she was still thirsty. She grabbed a shiny bottle of luck, wondering if it might taste bitter. The liquid inside was a sensational shade of green, but it tasted of grass and old celery. How were these drinks so popular? Unless it was not the flavors that actually drew people to these waters. Evangeline studied the gleaming green bottle in her hands. Maybe the drinks inspired some sort of thirst compulsion. Despite her best efforts to put the drink down, Evangeline couldn't help but continue to guzzle the bottle of luck. When she finished, she was tempted to grab yet another, and she might have done it if she hadn't noticed the pile of missives sitting next to the lovely bottles. Evangeline didn't make it a habit of reading other people's correspondence, but she was giddy with physical fatigue and the strange rush provided by the drinks, and she noticed something familiar about the folded letter on the top of the pile. The note was in her handwriting, and it was addressed to Lord Jax. It was the letter she'd written him last week. She picked through a few more notes. All of them were written to Jax. No wonder the bell had been ringing so wildly. This place belonged to him. 47. Evangeline knew Jax would be unhappy with her going through his mail, but he was asleep and she couldn't stop. It was like drinking from the bottles of flavored water, except the only magic at play was her curiosity about Jax. The letter sadly did not give her any indication as to what Jax wanted from the Valerie Arch, but they did confirm that this was Jack's place of business. Most of the correspondents asked him for favors or meetings. So many people were far too eager to become indebted to him, just as she had once been. She never really thought of Jax as someone who worked, exactly. His office appeared that way as well, with its disorganized bookshelves and mismatched chairs, but after spending time with him, Evangeline knew that Jax was not as reckless or careless as he led people to believe. He was a calculated collector. She'd seen him cash in favors from two different fates, chaos and poison, and the letters on his desk held promise of even more. It would have been easy to get derailed from her search for a book containing a love potion cure to see what sort of things Jax took from people, and she might have briefly paused to rifle through his desk a little more. He would have undoubtedly had no compunction about looking through her things, but all she found were some ugly coins, a blue silk ribbon, and some recently scandal sheets about our wedding, and of course apples. Then she was back to the bookshelves, hunting for a tome about a love spell antidote. Most of Jack's books were crookedly stacked next to volumes without any apparent reason, except for a small collection of the last books she'd have expected to find here, The Ballad of the Archer and the Fox. Something warmed inside of her at the sight of so many copies of her favorite storybook. Jax owned 7 volumes, ranging from old to very old. Positioned more precisely than anything else in his den, they sat side by side on the tip-top of the shelf, the sort of place where a person stored books they didn't want anyone else touching. What was all this about? She wished Jax were awake so that she could ask him, but he hadn't moved from his position on the sofa, where his limbs were recklessly sprawled, making him look unmanageable even in his sleep. Evangeline reached for the first volume. She knew she was being distracted, but all she wanted was to look at the last page and see what sort of the ending it had. She wanted to know if it had a happy ending. If the archer kissed the fox girl, or if he'd killed her, and maybe seeing all these books felt like a sign. She was starting to think that sometimes she imagined things were signs when they weren't. But that didn't mean they were not actual signs. She opened the first book, but the pages in the back were all ripped out, and unfortunately she didn't have better luck with any of the other volumes. Every copy fought her. One book kept falling from her hands every time she tried to open it. Another book had only blank pages at the end. Finally, she reached the 7th copy. Her fingers tingled as she lifted the cover. The book opened easily, and it was the perfect example of a person finding what they needed instead of what they wanted. The Ballad of the Archer and the Fox was printed on the spine, but when Evangeline opened the book, the title page said, Recipes of the Ancient North, translated for the first time in 500 years. It was the same title as Marisol's illicit spell book. The table of contents only listed recipes, and the first few entries were all made with innocuous ingredients like turnips, potatoes, and celery, but about a dozen pages later the recipes turned to spells and potions and magic, and some of it did sound just as horrible as Lala and Jax had claimed. Evangeline furiously flipped past spells to summon hellfire and to drain a person's soul until she found one section on love. For finding love, for ending love, for turning someone into your one true love. The first 2 spells weren't of any help, but the 3rd spell looked as if it might be useful. For turning someone into your one true love. Warning, love spells and potions are among the most volatile and unpredictable. If you choose to proceed, please note all cautions below. You will need a vial of malefic oil, hair, tears, sweat, and blood, your own and that of the person you desire most. A candle dyed the color of the love you wish for. The substitution of other oils is not recommended. Although difficult to procure, malefic oil is the best way to ensure your love potion will work only on the person you desire most. However, be very careful. In its raw form, malefic oil is extremely toxic. Hair is the easiest to obtain and therefore will produce the mildest results. For the most potent outcome, blood is recommended. However, when it comes to spells involving love, this book would encourage the use of milder ingredients. Extremely potent love potions can result in dangerous and highly volatile emotions. The purest red will result in a feeling closest to love. Pink will produce something more akin to mild affection. Dark purple will result in obsession and is not recommended. Combine all the ingredients in bowl. Spoonful of sugared rose, pinch of cardamom, sprinkle of orris root powder, pure glass bowl. Combine all ingredients in bowl, set above candle aflame. Say the name of the object of your desire 7 times and then let the flame burn through the night. To use, once the solution is complete, use your finger to brush the mixture against the skin of the object of your desire. Just a touch is needed. Warning, there is a cost to every spell. The intensity of the love will determine the intensity of the cost, which may range from rain on your wedding day to a deeply marred happily ever after. To undo a spell. Love spells and potions rarely reverse on their own, though people who cast powerful ones often come to regret their choices. If you wish to undo a love spell, this book recommends Serum for Truth. Recipe on page 186. Evangeline could not flip to page 186 fast enough. Not only had the love potion mentioned malefic oil, it said one side effect was ruined wedding days, more evidence of Marisol's guilt. Evangeline might have been to blame for Marisol's first failed wedding, but Jax had sworn repeatedly the wolf attack that had prevented the second attempt had never been his doing, and Evangeline was finally inclined to believe him. Luke's attack must have been the cost of Marisol's love spell. Evangeline looked again at Jax, negligently draped across the sofa as he slept. She wondered if there were other things she'd been wrong about as well. But there'd be time to ask him later. Right now, the only thing she needed to do was to brew the cure mentioned in her book. Serum from Truths. Truth is often bitter, particularly when a person has been tasting more enjoyable lies. To remedy, you will need to erase the sweet taste of falsehood. Recommended ingredients: crushed bones of the dead or charred dragon skin, an honest pinch of earth, a handful of pure water, 7 drops of blood from a magical vein. Mix all ingredients over a fire made of young kindling for best results. Warning: there is a cost to every spell. More truths than people want are often revealed. Additional effects of Serum for Truths are usually temporary, and they may include fatigue, impaired decision-making and judgment, dizziness and the inability to tell a lie, and the urge to reveal any unspoken truths. 48. It was dusk when the potion was done. Jax still sprawled across the sofa as if he hadn't slept in years. Jax, she rocked his shoulder. But when he moved his golden head, it was only to burrow deeper into his pillow. She jostled him once more time. She thought he'd be awake by now, but maybe he needed the rest, so she didn't think he'd slept at all the nights that she'd been poisoned. He must have been exhausted even before the mausoleum. And perhaps it was better for her that he took his rest. Evangeline doubted he would have been enthusiastic about her plan. She already knew he wouldn't want her to go back to Wolf Hall, and he probably wouldn't trust her potion either. Although she was quite proud of her work. For the earth, she'd scraped the dirt from her boots. For the water, she'd taken snow from outside and let it melt. The crushed bones of the dead had been tricky. She hadn't discovered any skeletons inside Jack's office, but she had found a dead spider. For the blood, she contemplated borrowing a few drops from Jax, as he was clearly more magical, but Jax was so far from honest, Evangeline wondered if his magic blood might do more harm than good. She decided her blood would have to suffice. It worked well enough to undo locks. Hopefully it would help undo spells. After that, she'd poured her concoction into one of the remaining bottles of Fortuna's fantastically flavored water, hoping the drink would be as enticing to Tiberius as it had been to her, and then she wrapped the bottle up in paper. All she needed to do now was to write Jax a note. Evangeline didn't know why she signed her name that way. She felt a little silly as soon as it was done, but she didn't want to waste time rewriting it. Dear Jax, if you wake up and I'm not here, do not fret, unless it's well passed on. Then I may be in trouble. I think I know who the killer is. I fear it's Marisol after all. For motive, look at the scandal sheet, which you've been using as a poor substitute for a blanket. I've gone to Wolf Hall to save Tiberius from marrying her, and to hopefully clear my own name. Little Fox. Maybe if she were very lucky, Jax would never see the note. If everything went her way, she'd get in and out of Wolf Hall before Jax even woke up. Evangeline almost laughed at the idea of everything going her way, but there was a chance that it would happen. She kept her plan simple. She would enter Wolf Hall via the same hidden passages she snuck out through to meet Jax. Then she'd leave her love potion antidote in Tiberius's chambers, where he would be sure to find it, and with any luck would be compelled to drink. If the antidote worked, Tiberius would be cured, and Marisol's duplicity would be revealed to him as it had been to Luke. If the antidote didn't work, it would prove Marisol was innocent, but the killer would still be out there. And if Evangeline got caught delivering the antidote, then the killer would never be found because she'd be blamed for the murder. 49. Evangeline wasn't scared, she was terrified. A shuddering breath of broken white puffs escaped her lips as she reached the outskirts of Wolf Hall and took in its white snowstones and pointed tower caps. For an icy moment she couldn't move. Her entire body tightened with memories of Apollo, of how she'd scaled these walls to climb into her chamber, and then held her all night through the... She could still see his broad smile on the day of their wedding and his heartbreak on the night when he died. With another burst of white breath, she forced the legs to move forward. Step, breathe, duck, dart toward hidden door, quick finger, open door, enter passage. She tried to take one step at a time and not think about how the corridors of Wolf Hall were wider and brighter as she remembered, and how anyone who stepped inside would be sure to spot her immediately, scurrying about like a frightened mouse. Fortunately, most inhabitants of Wolf Hall were currently occupied with supper, and she just needed to stay that way a little while longer. She was almost at her old bedchamber next to Tiberius's former room, and she desperately hoped it was the same suite he was using now. Her hands grew damp with sweat, making it difficult to pull one glove off and bare her fingers as she reached the door that she needed to open. Another drop of blood, another undone lock. Another small surge of victory as she stepped inside the darkened room. The fire was out, the candles unlit, but she detected whiffs of smoke and musk and soap, telling her that someone had been living here. Her eyes adjusted to the dim, allowing her to make out the hulking shape of the bed. She'd hoped to find a nightstand beside it, something that Tiberius would be sure to see before retiring, but there wasn't a bedside table. She'd have to settle for either the low table in the sitting area, where there were a line of bottles of liquor, or the vanity. Or if it had been Apollo, she would have chosen the vanity. But for Tiberius, the table where he kept his libations seemed best. Her hands shook as she unwrapped the bottle of curiosity. Then she rapidly set it on the table and fled the room before she could be tempted to drink it. It all took under a minute. She was terrified, and she was quick. But she wasn't quick enough. She heard the footsteps as soon as she was in the too bright hall. And then she saw her, Marisol. Evangeline felt almost childlike fright, as if she were watching a monster rather than just another girl her age. Marisol was looking at something in her hands as she turned a corner, cheeks blushing prettily and beribboned braids of light brown hair shining under the torchlight. Her dress was the color of spun gold. The overskirt had an impracticable train, and the gilded ribbons crisscrossed over the bodice, matching the bands in her braids and the cuff bracelets decorating her arms in an intricate lattice pattern. She already looked like a princess. Run! Leave! Get out! 100 variations of the same thought raced through Evangeline's head. If she ran, she might beat Marisol. Her stepsister's lovely gown with its princess train wasn't designed for running, but Evangeline didn't move fast enough, and her split second of indecision, in the moment when she looked at Marisol over, taking in her happiness instead of choosing to flee, Marisol looked up. Evangeline? It had felt like a long hall before, but clearly it was not. Within a heartbeat, Marisol was there hugging Evangeline, as if they shared blood rather than betrayal. She didn't seem to notice that Evangeline stiffened, every muscle tensing all the way to her clenched hands. I'm so relieved you're all right. Marisol gushed. I've been terribly worried, but we can't talk here. Marisol let go of Evangeline to open the door to Evangeline's former bedchamber. Hurry, my guards are just around the corner. Marisol waved a slender arm, frantic, as a single lock of hair fell out of its coiffure. If she was acting, it was a flawless performance. Evangeline, hurry, if the guards catch you. Even I won't be able to help you. Tiberius is convinced you murdered his brother. Boots' steps thundered closer. If the guards found Evangeline dressed like a stylish assassin and scowling at the queen to be just outside the prince's room, they would not only arrest her, they might suspect that Evangeline had done something nefarious. If they were smart, they'd search Tiberius's room, find the bottle with the antidote, and there was a chance they'd be compelled to drink it instead, ruining her plans. Evangeline knew she couldn't trust Marisol, but she had no choice except to follow her stepsister into the suite, warm from the hearth that appeared to have been recently lit with a fire. The room was just as Evangeline remembered, with hand-painted paper on the walls, a fireplace made of crystal, and an enormous princess bed. The only difference was that the scent of vanilla and sweet cream, which told her that this was Marisol's room now. At least she looked a little abashed. Tiberius wanted me to close to him. His rooms were just next door. Marisol worried her lower lip between her teeth. We'll have to get you out of here before he comes back. I can put you in one of my gowns. It will be a little small for you, but you'll blend in better. Marisol pursed her lips as she looked over Evangeline's leather boots, her short, tiered skirt, and her lacy I'm off to meet a vampire corset, and Evangeline would have sworn there was a flicker of jealousy, as if now Marisol wished to be a fugitive instead of a princess. It was the sort of look Evangeline would have disregarded before, something there and then quickly hidden before it was found, as if Marisol didn't even wish to acknowledge it, but Evangeline couldn't ignore it. She had been wrong to think she could just drop off the cure for Tiberius and then wait from a distance until she learned if it worked or not. That would never be answer enough. She needed to know why Marisol had done all of this. Why are you helping me? A tiny line formed between Marisol's thin brows, but Evangeline swore her skin went pale. Did you think I would betray you? I think you already did. I finally figured out what the cookbooks on your night table were really spell books. It's not what you think, Marisol cut in. Stop lying to me. It took everything Evangeline had to keep her voice low,
that the guards outside wouldn't hear. I saw your spell books. I know you gave Tiberius a love potion, just like the one you gave to Luke. Marisol's jaw went slack, her shoulders fell, and she stumbled back, spine hitting one of the bed's posters as she shook like a ribbon, blown by the wind, undone by this single accusation. Okay, there are 4 chapters left now. I'm going to get something to drink, something warm to drink. I'm thinking of it being maybe like just hot lemon water. I'm going to get hot lemon water. If I can figure out where I put my mug. I put it somewhere. I know I put it somewhere. I must find it. Also, I have some good news, but I'll wait. I thought I brought my mug into my room, but it must be downstairs. I'll go look for it. felt like all the confirmation that he eventually needed, and yet there was no sense of triumph as she watched her stepsister struggle for words. Marisol opened her mouth and a sob ripped free, dry and tearless, but Evangeline knew she couldn't let herself be fooled again just because Marisol looked like a kicked baby lamb. I'm sorry about Luke, but I swear I didn't put a spell on Tiberius. A flicker of hurt crossed her fragile features. I learned my lesson after what happened to Luke, and after all the names the papers called me, though I suppose I really did deserve that. But you have to believe me, Evangeline. I never meant to hurt you. You stole the boy I loved, then you framed me for murder. How is that not supposed to hurt? I didn't frame you for murder. How could you even think that? I was trying to hide you just now. I'm still hiding you. If I wanted you caught for murder, I would just have to yell for the soldiers outside my door, but I'm not doing that, and I'm not going to. Marisol clamped her mouth shut, more determined than Evangeline had ever seen her. But just because Marisol wasn't completely heartless didn't mean she was innocent. She'd admitted to putting a spell on Luke. Evangeline couldn't be tricked into feeling sympathy for her stepsister because of her shaking chest or her pleading eyes, or the way her voice cracked when she spoke. I know you don't trust me, and I don't blame you after what I did to Luke, but I really didn't mean to hurt you. Then why did you do it? Evangeline asked. Why did you pick him if it wasn't to hurt me? The fireplace crackled, filling the suite with a surge of fresh heat as Marisol breathed a ragged exhale. I'd never done a spell before, and I didn't even think it would work, but I suppose I was jealous of you, she admitted. You had so much freedom and confidence in who you were and what you believed. You didn't even try to fit in the way my mother always told me I needed to. You kept your hair that strange color and talked about fairy tales as if they were real, and everyone else believed in them too. You should have been a pariah. But people loved you and your odd little shop. And even though your father was gone, he'd been so proud of who you were. I just had a mother who wanted me to sit straight and look pretty, but I was never pretty enough because I couldn't catch the attention of any suitors, and my mother couldn't stop reminding me of it day after day after day. Marisol swiped at a few errant tears. She had looked so lovely in the hall, but now she appeared miserable. She was hugging her chest, curling further into herself as her body was racked by sobs, and Evangeline couldn't help but feel some sympathy. Her words stung. No one liked to be called strange or pariah, and Marisol's choices had been terrible, but Marisol's mother was awful, and she'd been feeding her daughter poisonous ideas for her entire life. One day I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to try to be a bit more like you. I looked into magic. Marisol said it in a whisper as if it still made her nervous. One of the cooking books you had gifted me was actually a spell book, and I suppose I picked Luke because he was so good to you. I knew you would sneak out to see him. One day I followed you. I saw the way he looked at you, and I wanted that. I wanted someone kind and someone my mother would be impressed with, but I didn't think it would work, and I didn't think it would be so potent. Then why didn't you undo it? Evangeline asked. I wanted to, but the book I had said only methods of undoing the spell were vampire venom or killing the person. My only choice was to marry him or leave him miserable. Evangeline felt her first stab of guilt because it became a little harder to stay angry with Marisol. Evangeline wasn't sure her stepsister was being entirely honest, but she couldn't argue with this reasoning or judge her for this part of the story, as Evangeline had done something very similar with Apollo. A love spell doesn't feel like regular love, Marisol explained. At first it was exciting, but that quickly wore off. Then everything went sour. I lied to you about Luke avoiding me. I was the one who tried to break things off after the second failed wedding. I was petrified of what would happen if we tried to marry again, and I've felt miserable ever since. When you and I were traveling here and you were telling me all your mother's weird stories, I decided to find another spell book with a cure for Luke in case he ever returned to Belinda. That's why someone spied me looking for spell books. It wasn't because I wanted to hurt you, it was because I wanted to mend things. I felt so terrible, Evangeline. You turned to stone for me, and then you brought me here so that I could get a fresh start, and all this time I walked around with the knowing that I didn't deserve any of your kindness. I'm so sorry. I felt so guilty and so ashamed, and for so long I wanted to tell you, but I've been terrified you'd hate me. I don't hate you, Evangeline said. Her stepsister had made mistakes, but Evangeline was starting to believe that murder wasn't one of them. As far as for the love spell she'd used on Luke, Evangeline couldn't entirely fault her. If anything, she'd related to Marisol. Evangeline had been living with the same guilt and fear for the secrets she'd been keeping. If only she hadn't been so afraid to be honest, both of them could have been spared some pain. I wouldn't blame you if you did hate me. I swear I didn't kill Apollo or enchant Tiberius, and I didn't frame you for murder, but I know I've done unforgivable things. I deserve to be the cursed bride. You're not the cursed bride, Evangeline said gently. You don't have to keep saying that. The spell I used to warn me there would be consequences. That's why the fates attacked my wedding, and that's why a wolf attacked Luke. I know I shouldn't have be engaged to Tiberius now. Marisol mumbled. I keep fearing that something horrible will happen to him too, but I also keep hoping that I've suffered enough. Marisol closed her eyes, and a tear fell as she shook. The bedpost at her back seemed to be the only thing holding her up. Evangeline imagined that if she were to tug on one of the ribbons in Marisol's hair, her stepsister would unravel like a skein of yarn. Evangeline might have wanted that earlier, but now she'd rather help hold her stepsister together. She reached out and gave Marisol a hug. Marisol had made mistakes, but she was not the only one. I forgive you. Wide, shocked eyes met Evangeline's. How can you forgive me? I've made some poor choices as well. Evangeline squeezed her stepsister a final time before letting her go. Now it was her turn to be nervous, but Marisol deserved to know the truth. It wasn't fair to let her carry all the guilt or believe that Evangeline was entirely innocent. Evangeline didn't know if they would ever be true sisters, but they would never mend all their wounds if some were still infected with lies. You are not the only one who is jealous, Evangeline confessed. I was so upset and hurt about you were marrying Luke that I prayed to the Prince of Hearts to stop your wedding. You what? Marisol's spine stiffened and her shoulders straightened. I didn't think he'd turn you to stone. What did you think would happen? Marisol spat. The words hit like a slap, stunning Evangeline. You're just as selfish as my mother always said. You ruined my wedding so that you could become a hero and I could become the cursed bride. That's not what You let me believe I was cursed, Marisol cried. But there weren't any tears this time. Her eyes were two pools of anger. Evangeline thought Marisol would understand, and then maybe they'd laugh about it, but clearly she'd made a great error in judgment. Marisol, Evangeline said, alarm slipping into her voice. If her stepsister kept raising her tone, the soldiers outside the door would surely hear, Please calm down. Please don't tell me to calm down, Marisol raged. I felt so guilty, and all along you'd done something just as bad, even worse. You made a deal with the fate to curse me. That's not what Guards, Marisol screamed. She's here. Evangeline Fox is in my room. 51. Evangeline had thought Marisol had betrayed her before, but she hadn't, not really. Bewitching Luke wasn't betrayal. There had been nothing to betray. Evangeline and Marisol had lived in the same house, but they weren't really sisters. They'd never shared secrets. They'd never shared heartaches. They'd never been as honest as they'd been with each other tonight, but Evangeline should not have been so truthful. Marisol, don't do this, Evangeline pleaded. Marisol's only reply was to sink to the ground and hug her knees, making herself look small and vulnerable as the door to her suite flung open. Evangeline frantically searched for an escape, but there was only the balcony. She couldn't survive a jump, but there wasn't enough time. Two guards, quickly followed by another pair, rushed into the room in a clatter of drawn swords, all pointed at her. She had just confessed to murdering Prince Apollo, Marisol said. That's not true, Evangeline was cut off as several soldiers converged, grabbing and restraining and cutting off her words. My heart, are you all right? Tiberius burst through the doors. He sounded just like his brother when he'd been cursed as he rushed into Marisol's arms. Evangeline felt utterly stupid once again for believing her stepsister had not bewitched him. Marisol might have confessed some things, but clearly she hadn't been honest about everything, so she really was behind all of this. Put Evangeline in my chambers, Tiberius ordered. Darling, are you sure that's a good idea? Marisol latched onto his arms, doing an excellent impression of a helpless maiden. Shouldn't you take her down to the dungeon, lock her up where she can't hurt anyone else? Don't worry, my heart. Tiberius pressed a kiss to Marisol's forehead. I just need to question her, then I'll make sure she's put somewhere she can't hurt anyone else ever again. The guards used a little care as they dragged Evangeline into Tiberius's chambers and tied her to one of the chairs. After they relieved her of Jack's dagger, her ankles were roughly secured to the legs, and her arms were stretched behind her. Her hands were bound at the wrists and then tied again with a rope that went all the way around her midsection, cutting into her ribs and making it uncomfortable to breathe. Tiberius didn't spare her a glance as it was done. He didn't acknowledge it when she repeatedly cried, I swear I didn't kill your brother. Tiberius simply stared into a great black stone hearth and ran a hand through his long copper hair, watching as one of his guards started a fire. He no longer looked at the impish rebel prince she'd met at her wedding. Lines that had not been there before bracketed his mouth, and his eyes were full of red. He didn't appear bewitched right now. He looked as if he were in mourning, which was one good thing. If Tiberius were really mourning, if he really loved his brother as she believed, then he would want to know who the real killer was. All Evangeline he had to do was to stay alive long enough for Tiberius to see the blue bottle of Fortuna's fantastically flavored water containing the antidote she'd made. It was sitting on the low center table across from her next to his other bottles of liquor. If he just saw it and drank it, all would be right in the world. Evangeline would have tried to bring the bottle to his attention, but she imagined mentioning it would only make him all suspicious. She sensed how each of the soldiers in the room felt about Prince Apollo from the way they regarded her. Disgust, anger, loathing. There were no hints of pity, although Havelock, his personal guard, who had also been there the night that Apollo had died, looked regretful. He probably felt as if he'd failed his prince. Tiberius continued staring into the fire. He picked up a fireplace iron shaped like a trident, placed its tip in the burgeoning flames, and watched as it turned red. Evangeline started sweating, skin going slick against her bones. She didn't know if Tiberius was planning on torturing her with a fire iron or killing her, but she feared either option. Your Highness, Havelock said softly, now that we have Princess Evangeline in custody, we should delay tomorrow's wedding. This news may— No, Tiberius's voice was slightly unhinged. The soldiers did a good job of schooling their expressions, but Evangeline swore at least two went wide-eyed, and she wondered if they suspected something was amiss with the young prince's engagement. I'll handle this from here. Tiberius tore this heated iron from the fire and blew on the tip until it went brighter. You can leave us, all of you. But, Havelock began, Your Highness, careful, Tiberius said. If you're about to imply that I can't handle one tied-up female, then I'm going to either be offended or think you're incompetent and tying knots. The soldiers filed toward the door. Wait, Evangeline begged. Don't go. He's been bewitched by Marisol. Do not besmirk my love. Tiberius whirled around and brought the fire iron down on the low center table, shattering one of his liquor bottles. Glass flew like arrows. Liquid sizzled. Evangeline sucked in a gasp as she watched the bottle of Fortuna's fantastically flavored water totter back and forth. It fell on its side. Thankfully, it didn't break. That had been close. Evangeline would have to be more careful. Mentioning Marisol was clearly out of the question unless she wanted to risk her only chance of surviving. There was also the hope that Jax might make a perfectly timed appearance and come to her rescue once again, but she couldn't rely on that. For all she knew, he was still asleep on the sofa. The soldiers all left the chamber. Tiberius stalked closer, boots pounding on the broken glass. He stopped abruptly and eyed the tipped-over bottle of antidote with a scowl. How did this get in here? I hate these things. He picked up the bottle with 2 fingers and brought it toward the fire. No, 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 she wanted to scream. But instead of throwing it in, the bottle worked its magic. Tiberius stopped, took another look at the concoction, popped the cork in his mouth, and drank. Evangeline felt her hope grow bright, but after only a few seconds, Tiberius rinsed the bottle from his lips. He shuddered and gave the drink a foul look. Once I'm king, these drinks will be the first thing I outlaw. Tiberius weighed the fire iron in his hand as if deciding how he wanted to do this. Evangeline could only take shallow breaths. She needed to buy more time for the antidote to work. She doubted begging would help, but maybe she could get him to talk without triggering a violent reaction. The last time I saw you, you said that when we met again, you'd tell me why you had disappeared. A bitter laugh, another drink, followed by another wince. I left after my brother and I fought about you, Tiberius said grimly. I told him you weren't the savior everyone claimed. I told him you'd be the death of him. Why would you think that? All that matters is I was right. The prince pointed to the fire iron directly at Evangeline's throat. No, I didn't do this. She rocked her chair urgently, hoping by some miracle it would fall hard enough to shatter the arms and legs and set her free, but the chair was too heavy. She couldn't even get the seat to budge. I didn't kill your brother. I know, Tiberius said. I've known it the whole time. What? Evangeline sputtered. He was telling her what she'd hoped to hear, but the young prince still looked as if he had no intention of letting her go. His freckled face was that of a stubborn soldier with an order he was determined to carry out. I don't understand, she said. If you know I'm innocent, why are you doing this? It's too dangerous to let you live. Tiberius shook his head, expression determined, yet Evangeline sensed he didn't get any pleasure from this. He took another drag from the antidote bottle and then pulled down the neck of a striped doublet, revealing a dark black tattoo of a broken skeleton key. Do you know what this is? Evangeline shook her head. This is the symbol of the Protectorate. The Protectorate. She had heard the name before, but where? Her heart quickened as she tried to think, and her heart stopped altogether as she remembered. Apollo had told her that about the Protectorate the night he'd shared the stories about the Valerie Arch. They'd been in the first version of the story, where the Valors had made something horrible. Apollo had said the Protectorate was some sort of secret society responsible for protecting the broken pieces of the Valerie Arch and making sure it would never be opened again. Evangeline looked again at Tiberius's broken key tattoo. The Fortuna matriarch had worn a chain with a similar key around her neck. She must have been a member of the Protectorate as well. And as soon as she'd suspected that Evangeline was the girl mentioned in the prophecy that kept the Valerie arch locked, the matriarch had tried to kill her. Evangeline's hope crashed and died. Tiberius took another swig from the bottle in his hands. Even if the antidote worked and cured him of his artificial love for Marisol, Evangeline knew that she was never getting out of this room alive. Not if Tiberius believed she was part of a prophecy that, once fulfilled, would allow the Valerie arch to open and release the Valor's terrible creation into the world. I'm sorry, Evangeline. Tiberius's voice hardened, and his hands gripped the fire and iron, tired, knuckles turning white. From the look on your face, I'm assuming you know what the Protectorate is, so you know what I have to do and why. No, Evangeline said. I don't know how you can kill someone because of a story that's twisted by a curse. Your brother told me there are two different versions. In one, the Valerie, it doesn't matter which version of the story is true. A muscle popped at his jaw. The Valerie arch can never be opened, which is why you have to die. I knew it as soon as I saw your hair. You're the prophesied key. You were born to open it. Tiberius lifted the iron once again, bringing it dangerously close to her skin. Evangeline's breathing hitched. She was running out of the chances to talk him out of this. Sweat beaded at his brow and dropped onto the broken glass near his boots. She was looking at other glass, the almost empty glass bottle in Tiberius's hand. He'd nearly finished the antidote. It didn't seem as if the truth serum was breaking Marisol's spell, but Evangeline wondered if the side effects of her potion were kicking in. Fatigue, impaired decision-making and judgment, dizziness, the inability to tell a lie, and the urge to reveal any unspoken truths. Tiberius was definitely experiencing the inability to tell a lie, or she doubted he would have told her he didn't believe she was guilty. Maybe if she pushed him enough, she could somehow lead him to confess the truth to his soldiers, or she could finally get him to tell her what the entire prophecy was. Then maybe she could prove she wasn't the girl in it. Maybe it was just a coincidence that she sounded like this girl. At least tell me what the Valerie Arch prophecy says. If you're going to kill me because you think it mentions me, don't I deserve to know the entire thing? Tiberius swished the blue remains of the bottle, appearing torn between drinking, talking, or ending all of this right now. But her theory about the antidote's side effects must have been correct. It appeared he couldn't stop himself from spilling secrets. After a moment, he began to recite. This arch may only be unlocked with a key that has not yet been forged. Conceived in the north and born in the south, you will know this key because she will be crowned in rose gold. She will be both peasant and princess, a fugitive wrongly accused, and only her willing blood will open the arch. Evangeline sagged against her bounds. It was so short, and almost every piece of it fit her. She had heard the line about her being crowned in rose gold and being both peasant and princess from the Fortuna matriarch. It hadn't been true at the time, but now it was. She was also a fugitive wrongly accused, thanks to whoever had killed Apollo. She didn't know where she'd been conceived. Her parents had always joked they'd found her in a curiosity crate. Now she wondered if there was a reason why they had concealed the truth, if they had known about this prophecy. Had they seen her rose gold hair and her origin as a sign that it could be true someday? But there was one line of the prophecy that she could ensure never came to pass. She just had to convince Tiberius of this. You just said only my willing blood will open the arch, which means I have to want it open, and I don't. Doesn't matter, Tiberius gave her a bleak look. Magic things always want to do that which they are created to do. But I'm not a magic thing, I'm just a girl with pink hair. I wish that were true. His voice was torn. I don't want to kill you, Evangeline, but that arch must remain locked. The Valors had too much power. They weren't evil, but they did things they never should have done. He finished off the remnants of his drink, and this time he pointed the iron at her heart. Wait, Evangeline cried. Can I have a last request? I don't think Apollo would want you to murder me. I'm sorry, I really am, but you're not leaving this room alive. I'm not asking you to spare me. Her voice cracked. If this didn't work, these could be her last words. I'm just asking you to call in your soldiers, tell them my crimes, and then let one of them kill me. Your brother wouldn't want you to murder his wife. Tiberius frowned. But she could see another bout of indecision ghosting across his face. He sensed this was a bad idea, but his judgment was impaired from the antidote, and he wasn't certain. Please, it's my last request. Slowly, Tiberius lowered the poker. The soldiers were called back in, but Tiberius didn't waste time with pleasantries. I need you to kill her. He shoved the fire iron into the hand of the closest guard, a tall woman with a heavy braid and fury in her eyes. Wait, Evangeline breathed, hoping she hadn't just made a terrible miscalculation. You need to tell them my crimes first. Evangeline Fox, Tiberius ground out. You have been sentenced to death for the crime of... His jaw seemed to stick. He opened and closed his mouth several times, but no words came out. "You can't say it, can you?" she asked. Her antidote might not have worked exactly as she'd hoped, but it was working. Additional effects of serum for truths may include the inability to tell a lie. Evangeline could have cried with joy, although Tiberius looked as if he really wanted to kill her now. "What have you done?" He glowered at the empty bottle in his hands. "Did you poison me?" "I gave you a truth serum, which is why you can't honestly say that I killed your brother. Ask him," Evangeline begged the female guard with the iron. "Ask him who killed Apollo." "In this," Tiberius ordered the guard. She. The guard had lifted the iron, but she hesitated at the prince's stammering. "Can't you see she's fed me some sort of magic?" Tiberius growled, sweat beading on his brow. "She's obviously, but he couldn't call her anything untrue." "He keeps breaking off because he can't lie," Evangeline said, "and he knows that I'm innocent. I had no reason for desire to kill Apollo. I was the person with nothing to gain and everything to lose, and Tiberius knows that." She's telling the truth." The prince's face turned red. "Evangeline didn't kill my brother. I did." 52. Tiberius staggered on his feet. If Evangeline had been standing, she would have undoubtedly lost her footing as well. She expected him to try to take the confession back or grab the iron from the guard and run her through. Wasn't that what a murderer would do? But perhaps it wasn't just the antidote side effects that had torn Tiberius's confession free. Instead of fighting back, Tiberius fell to his knees and brought his hands to his face. "I didn't mean to kill him. It was supposed to be you." Eyes rimmed in grief and anguish met hers. "I didn't want to hurt my brother. I found a poison. A fate's tears that were only supposed to affect females, but it seems that story was a lie." Tears finally streamed down Tiberius's cheeks, long, endless rivers of them. It was almost like when she'd cried from Lala's tears, only his heartache was entirely real. Tiberius sobbed the way that only broken things could, and Evangeline couldn't help but start crying with him. She cried once more for Apollo. She cried with relief that she was still alive, and she cried for Tiberius, not for the part of him that had tried to kill her, but for the part of him that had killed his brother by mistake. She didn't know what it was like to have a sibling, and given all that had happened between her and Marisol, she doubted that she would ever understand, but Evangeline understood how it felt to lose family. She could not fathom being responsible for that loss. She didn't know how long they both sat there crying. It could have been half the night, a handful of hours, or minutes that merely stretched out to feel like forever. The female guard who had been poised to kill her, had untied Evangeline right away, but it wasn't until after dawn that several of the other guards escorted Tiberius out to take him to a holding cell. He didn't try to fight them. "What's going on?" Marisol chose that moment to come out of her room. "Tiberius." The defeated prince looked up, his anguish briefly departing, but this time it wasn't replaced with love. "If I ever see you again, I will kill you too." It seemed the spell had finally broken, though Evangeline didn't know if it was because of her antidote, or if Jax had been right about real love being strong enough to break love spells, and it was actually Tiberius' love for his brother that had broken through when he had confessed the truth. He turned back to Evangeline. "For my last request, I never want to see her face again." "No, my love!" Marisol started to cry, and she kept the performance up, even as Evangeline had soldiers lock her inside of her room until further notice. Like Tiberius, she didn't want to see her stepsister anymore. Evangeline couldn't blame everything that had happened on Marisol. Marisol hadn't been the one to poison her or Apollo, but Evangeline did wonder what would have happened if Marisol had not put a spell on Luke. Would fate have intervened in another way to turn Evangeline into the girl in the Valerie Arch prophecy? Or would things have worked out differently for her and Luke and Apollo and Tiberius? Was she destined to end up here? Or was it just one of the many possible paths? She would never know, but she had a feeling this question would always haunt her. It didn't take long for Evangeline to transform from fugitive back into a princess. She was moved into another untainted royal suite, with a roaring fire and lots of thick cream carpets that felt wonderful beneath her tired feet. Everyone seemed to want to fuss over her, exclaim how glad they were that she was safe, and how they all knew she couldn't have killed Prince Apollo. Evangeline wasn't sure she believed any of them, but she accepted all the fussing. At the urging of the servants, she bathed and changed into a much more comfortable gown of white satin, with a striped black underskirt and a bodice decorated with pretty black embroidery. Northerners didn't wear full black for mourning, but it was customary to at least wear some. Even more guards and servants and half-awake palace officials were called into the suite after that. For hours it was flurry of maids bringing Evangeline warm food, and officials making requests and suggestions sounded like a lot like orders. Jax had yet to appear, and she did not worry too much about it. Maybe he had just hadn't come because her name had been cleared. Hours ago, a messenger had been sent to Christoph Neitlinger and the Daily Rumor so word could get out about Evangeline's innocence. Given how fast gossip spread, the entire kingdom probably knew by now, but she still would have liked to have seen Jackson told him the news herself. Ever since she'd proved her innocence, Evangeline had been eager to see Jackson's face when she shared that she'd confronted Marisol, discovered who had really killed Apollo, and cleared her name on her own. Only now that it was nearing late afternoon, her eagerness was turned into tightness in her chest. Why hadn't Jack shown up at Wolf Hall? He should have seen her note, unless he was still asleep. Yesterday she'd been amused by the idea of Jack's being slayed by slumber, but now it unnerved her. What if his fatigue hadn't just been a side effect of the vampire venom? I need a coat, she said. One of the many maids in the room stepped closer to the blazing fire. Would you like me to put another log on? No, I need to step out, Evangeline said. She knew no one wanted her to leave Wolf Hall. The council of the great houses, which now included Evangeline, was being called to assemble as soon as possible to discuss what was to be done, now that one direct heir was dead and the other was in prison. Any moment she'd be summoned to meet them, but she wasn't sure she could sit and wait any longer. She needed to make a quick trip back to the spires to check on Jax. She knew she shouldn't care so much, but she couldn't stop fearing that something was wrong. Your Highness! A soldier near the door cleared his throat. There's a gentleman who's just arrived, and he's insisting upon seeing you. He let him in. Eventually didn't allow the soldier to finish. It seems she'd been wrong about Jax for nothing. I'm afraid he's not with me. We put him in the receiving solarium. I'll take you to him, Your Highness. It was Havelock. Evangeline would have rather gone alone, but earlier Havelock had been the sole guard who hadn't looked at her with pure loathing. He'd all suggested that Tiberius postponed the wedding to Marisol, which showed bravery as well as good intuition on his part. If she were going to be safe with anyone, it would probably be Havelock. There were more protests as they ventured out the door. The council members are on their way. You can't leave now. You're too tired. You're going to pass out if you walk all that way. And then there was a lower voice inside her head, speaking only to her. Little Fox, where are you? It's about time, she thought. I'm heading to you right now. Don't. Jack's voice turned worried. I'll come to you. Evangeline found herself smiling just a little. She liked that he sounded concerned. Just wait for me, she thought. She was already on her way, and she thought it wasn't very far. Evangeline had only been to the brightly lit receiving solarium once with Apollo. He'd taken her and Marisol on a tour of Wolf Hall, and they had first moved into the castle. She'd been enchanted by the beautiful fortress that Wolferic Valor was rumored to have built as a gift for his wife Honora. Evangeline had imagined there were secret passages behind every tapestry and trapdoors hidden beneath the carpets, but now with fatigue clouding her vision, everything was a blur of stones and vaulted ceilings, fireplaces to battle the endless draughts, sconces full of unlit candles, the occasional bust, and the not-so-occasional portrait of Apollo. When she passed one of Apollo and Tiberius with arms around each other's shoulders, she had to pause. Apollo looked so happy and vibrant. It was the same way he'd often looked at her. She thought his expressions had been pure enchantment, but now it was painfully tempting to wonder if things had been realer than she believed, if she'd been right to hope that they could have really fallen in love. But she would never know. What would have been was a question that no one ever knew the answer to. Evangeline started walking again, following Havelock into a windowless hall void of tapestries and lit by crude torches that smelled of earth and smoke and secrets. She might have only been to the receiving solarium once, but this was utterly unfamiliar. Is this the right way? She asked. We had to take a detour, said Havelock. His face was impassive, the perfect palace soldier. If not for the creeping feeling of unease crawling over her skin, jolting her back to alertness, Evangeline might have believed him. Did you get lost, little fox? Jax's voice again. But he sounded farther away than before. Maybe you should meet me after all, she thought back. Then to Havelock. I think I'm going to turn around. That would be a mistake. The lilting voice came from behind her. 53. Evangeline spun around. The girl was about her age. Her face was round and her long dark hair was tied back, giving a clear picture of starburst mark the color of currant wine on her left cheek. Who are you? Evangeline asked. The girl was dressed as a palace servant, in a little cap and a wool gown with a cream apron, although Evangeline wondered if the clothes were borrowed, for they were ill-fitting and she'd never seen this girl before. Her birthmark was something Evangeline would have recognized. What's going on? She reached for Jack's dagger, tucked into the belt of her morning dress. It had been seized from her during her arrest, but it was one of the first things she'd taken back. The girl held up her hands in a peaceful gesture, revealing a tattoo on the underside of her wrist. A circle of skulls that reminded Evangeline of something that her overtaxed mind couldn't remember just then. Havelock and I aren't here to hurt you. We have something we need to show you. Evangeline gripped her knife tighter. Forgive me for being a little dubious on that front. Prince Apollo is alive, announced Havelock. Evangeline shook her head. She believed in a lot of things, but not people coming back from the dead. I saw him die. You saw him poisoned, but it didn't kill him. The girl gave Evangeline a taunting smile. One part triumph, one part dared to argue back. She was definitely not a servant, and Evangeline wanted to ask exactly who she was, but that didn't seem like the most vital questions. If Apollo is alive, then where is he? We've hidden him to keep him safe. Havelock stepped forward several paces and threw back a carpet to reveal a trapdoor that opened to a flight of stairs. He's down there. Evangeline gave him a skeptical look, but when Havelock and the girl both took to the stairs, letting her free to go, Evangeline's curiosity got the best of her. She decided to follow. The flight of steps was mostly dark, and her heart beat faster with every one. If Apollo was truly alive, then she was still married. They had a chance at the future she'd just been wondering about. She tried to feel excited, but if Apollo cared about her at all, why had he hidden in the palace as she'd been running for her life? She could understand if he were still upset from the undoing of Jack's spell, but hours ago his brother had almost killed her, and Evangeline would have definitely died the night of her wedding if it hadn't been for Jack's. Had Apollo not known these things, or did he think she deserved to die? If Evangeline neared the lower steps, she had hoped Apollo was alive, but it was a complicated sort of hope. Before, when she'd believed everything was a sign and her trip to the north meant finding her happily ever after, she would have been sure that there was a second chance waiting for her just a few feet away. Now she didn't know what to expect, or what she wanted. Now that she didn't know what to if Apollo gave her another chance, would she take it? Did she want him, or just the happily ever after that she'd thought that he could give her? The last step cracked beneath Evangeline's slippers. The room beyond was small, with a low wooden ceiling, and not nearly enough light. The air was stagnant and a little stale, and almost as soon as she entered, Evangeline wanted to leave. This was a mistake. Just past Havelock and the girl, Apollo had been lying down on his back, but he didn't look right. He didn't look alive. Evangeline almost silently called for Jax to tell him she was in danger, but the girl quickly said, Apollo is in a suspended state. I know he looks dead, but you can touch him. Please, Havelock added softly. We've been trying to revive him, but we think that you might be the only person who can bring him back. Evangeline wasn't even sure she believed Apollo was actually alive. He lay on the heavy wooden table, as unmoving as a corpse. His eyes were open, but even from the distance they were flat as pieces of sea glass. She still wanted to flee, but Havelock and the girl looked so expectant as they watched her. They weren't trying to hurt her or trap her. If she left, Evangeline would be running away from hope, not danger. Carefully she approached the table. Apollo was still dressed as he'd been on their wedding night, in only a pair of pants. The oil had thankfully been wiped from his chest, leaving just his amber pendant and the tattoo with her name. Gingerly she touched his arm. His skin was cooler than a person's should have been. His body didn't stir, but when she moved her hand to his chest, after a minute she felt it, just one barely there beat. Her heart fluttered as well. He really was alive. How did the two of you discover this, and why does no one else know? Evangeline took another look about the room, which was bare save for the table with Apollo and another small stand containing a water bin and some cloths. We didn't know who we could trust, Havelock said. I was there the night Apollo was poisoned. I was in the room with you after, when you wouldn't stop crying. It haunted me, made me think you might not be guilty. I knew that you had nothing to gain, unlike his brother. I didn't want to think Prince Tiberius had tried to kill Apollo. But when Tiberius became engaged almost immediately, a few other soldiers became suspicious as well. We borrowed Apollo's body from the royal morgue and reached out to Phaedra. Phaedra of the damned at your service. The girl flashed another smile that made Evangeline think she should have recognized the name. Have you not heard of me? Phaedra pouted. Phaedra, get on with it, said Havelock. Someone will notice the princess is gone soon. Fine, Phaedra huffed. I'm rather famous in some circles for having special talents. I can steal the secrets that people take to their graves. Havelock here thought that if I paid our prince's corpse a visit, I might learn some of his secrets, including who killed him. But Apollo didn't have any secrets, and everyone has secrets, even if it's just a secret fear of caterpillars or a tiny white lie they told a neighbor. That's when we realized Apollo wasn't dead. Whatever toxin was used on him didn't kill him. It put him in a suspended state. What's a suspended state? Evangeline asked. It pauses life, Phaedra said. Unless he's revived, Prince Apollo could stay like this for centuries without aging. There aren't a lot of stories about it. It's believed Honora Valor used to use it as part of her healing for people who she couldn't help immediately. Unfortunately, no one knows how she did it, or how to wake someone up from it. The practice of it was believed to have been lost with her death, But we thought you might be able to help. Phaedra looked up at Evangeline, the same way people had looked at her right after she'd returned from being stoned, as if she were the hero the papers all claimed. Evangeline felt more worn out than heroic, but for the first time she no longer felt the need to deny all the stories about her. What she'd done that day in Valinda had been courageous. Luke really been put under a spell, and she stopped him from marrying the girl who had cast it. Then Evangeline had turned herself to stone to save him and the rest of his wedding party. She might have mostly done it because she felt responsible for what had happened to them. But that didn't mean that what she'd done wasn't brave. Having faith was brave, but Evangeline wasn't sure the bravery was enough to save Apollo. What did they think she could do for him? In some of her mother's stories, kisses could cure the same way that Jack's kiss could kill, but those kisses were almost always ones involving true love. Of course, those stories were also cursed, so who knew what was really true? I could try to kiss him, she said. Phaedra gave her a tentative smile. Havelock nodded soberly. Evangeline moved her hand to Apollo's cheek and pressed her lips to his. He tasted like wax and hexes, and he didn't move or change. Disappointment twisted inside her, but this was merely her first try. If she couldn't cure him with a kiss, perhaps she could find another way to heal him. Maybe she could go to Jack's. He had enchanted her kiss before. Maybe he could. Evangeline broke off. She had forgotten that Jax had told her that there had never been any magic in her kiss. But what if he knew something? Maybe he could help her. She almost tried to ask him with her thoughts, but she stopped herself again. She couldn't repeat the mistakes she'd made with Luke. She couldn't compromise to save Apollo. If Jax helped her, he wouldn't do it for free. Perhaps they weren't enemies anymore, but she couldn't forget what he was. At one point, she thought Jax had used her to kill Apollo, but he hadn't. Jax had nothing to gain by killing Apollo, and Tiberius had confessed. Of course, during his confession, Tiberius also had said that the poison he'd used, Lala's tears, was only supposed to work on females, and although Jax had nothing to gain by poisoning Apollo, he did have a great deal to gain by turning Evangeline into a fugitive and making another line of the Valerie arch prophecy come true. She will be both peasant and princess, a fugitive wrongly accused, and only her willing blood will open the arch. Evangeline tried again to push the thought away. She was being paranoid. Jax hadn't done this to Apollo for the prophecy. Tiberius had confessed. But what if Tiberius's poison really had only affected her? After Evangeline had kissed him, Apollo hadn't sobbed uncontrollable way she had from drinking the tainted wine. What if Tiberius had poisoned Evangeline, but it was actually Jax who had done this to Apollo to turn Evangeline into a fugitive wrongly accused? Jax had said there hadn't been magic in her kisses, but what if there had been magic in his blood? The first 2 times she tasted Jax's blood, it had been sweet, but on the day of her wedding, right before she'd kissed Apollo, Jax's blood had been bitter. It had scared away the ghost fox. What if it was Jax's bitter blood that had once done this to Apollo? Again she tried to bury the thought. The idea of it all turned her stomach, and yet Evangeline couldn't let it go. She wanted to hope that Jax wouldn't have gone this far. But he was the Prince of Hearts. According to the stories, he left a trail of corpses as he'd searched for his one true love. He would definitely go this far if it gave him what he wanted, and he wanted to make that prophecy come true. But this still didn't mean her suspicions were right. Earlier she'd been convinced Marisol was the killer, but looking back, Evangeline now wondered if Jax might have been manipulating her about Marisol as well. In Lala's flat, Jax had just happened to be reading the same spell book that Marisol owned, revealing that Marisol could be a witch. Jax had then taken Evangeline to Chaos's underground kingdom, where Chaos made it sound as if a witch had poisoned Apollo. Then Luke had confirmed that Marisol was a witch. Evangeline had almost been convinced of Marisol's guilt after that, but it wasn't until she'd seen the scandal sheet that Jax had been clutching, the one with Marisol's wedding announcement, that she'd been certain her stepsister was a killer. Maybe it was a handful of coincidences. But Marisol made the perfect scapegoat. If Tiberius hadn't confessed and instead it had been revealed that Marisol put a love spell on Tiberius, everyone would be happy to believe that she'd also killed Apollo. But suddenly Evangeline wasn't even sure that Marisol had been the one to put a spell on Tiberius. Jax could have willed it to frame her. Was anything as she'd originally thought, or was everything Jax had done just to make the prophecy come true? But if Jax had done all this, why had he left Apollo alive? Havelock cleared his throat, and Phaedra gave Evangeline a curious look, both no doubt wondering why she was staring at Apollo's unblinking brown eyes. But Evangeline couldn't look away. She felt too close to figuring everything out. Phaedra had said Apollo could stay this way for centuries, not aging, not moving, not quite alive, but not really dead. Just like Evangeline had been when she'd been turned to stone. Her stomach dropped, and in that moment she knew. Jax would know that Evangeline could never leave Apollo in this state. This was why Jax had left him alive. Apollo was Jax's bargaining chip. If Jax had done this to Apollo, then he could undo it, and Evangeline knew exactly what Jax would want in exchange for his help. Jax wanted her willing blood to open the Valerie Arch, and she would have bet anything this was how he planned to get it. He'd poisoned Apollo to manipulate her. Evangeline didn't know if she wanted to laugh or cry. She knew what Jax was. She hadn't been foolish enough to believe that she was different or special, and that she wouldn't destroy her. Sorry, that he wouldn't destroy her, but maybe she'd believed it a little. She'd clearly believed it enough to spend a night with him inside a crypt, and just an hour ago she'd been terrified at the thought that Jax had been trapped in an enchanted sleep. She'd been ready to race to his rescue because she'd also been silly enough to think that something had changed between them that might in the crypt. When he told her the story of Donatella, she'd thought she'd understood him. She'd thought he was opening up, and that he was just a little human. But she should have listened when he told her that he was a fate and she was nothing but a tool to him. Jax no doubt knew that she wanted to save Apollo, but he was deeply mistaken if he thought she'd ever open the Valerie Arch for him. Evangeline would find a way to cure Apollo on her own, and then she'd make sure that Jax never hurt anyone else ever again. Jax was not her friend, but he'd taught her that she could open any door she wanted, and Evangeline knew exactly which door she needed to open next. 54. In another part of Wolf Hall, a door that had not been opened for centuries began to stir. Its hinges creaked, its wood groaned, and the wolf's head emblem carved upon its center curved its mouth into a smile. Thank you for listening to not Recipes of the Ancient North translated for the first time in 500 years, but Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I forgot for a moment that that's on the front. The thing about this book, I love most of it, and then it gets to the part where there's the whole werewolf thing and the vampire thing, and I'm just not into that. And not only am I not into that kind of thing, but it does feel like, and I could be wrong here, but it does seem as though the story is setting up this thing of like maybe there's another way around Jax and his true love being Donatella, and that maybe he could change things so that Evangeline ends up being his true love. But I really felt like Tella's personality was more suited to Jax, even though, I mean, it is better for Donatella to be with Dante. But I don't think it's good for either Jax or Evangeline to be together based on their extreme differences. It's not just like a little bit of them being opposite, but it's like they are just so, it just seems so wrong. Like, it's like I really wouldn't want to see that happen. And so that's partly why I was like, like, I'm all for the idea of, like, Jax finding someone who will be really good for him. But not if he can't even reciprocate. Anyway, but I still think it's an excellent book. I like the way that so many things in it are really symbolic of heartbreak and
just kind of the journey that you make towards like understanding that you have to let somebody go. Um, and that's really the only way to heal, is first by understanding that it really is not savable, so you can move on. Anyway, thank you for listening though. Oh, the good news I was going to say. The good news is I do have a copy of Spectacular, which is that Caraval novella. I have a copy of it now, so I could read that sometime soon. So that would be fun. I've never read it. Um, I've never read it. I mean, that could be very fascinating, like reading a book for the first time on stream. I've only ever read books on stream that I've already read before. So that would be different. Anyway, but thank you for listening. I hope you have a good day or a good night. Goodbye for now.